Any last words, Barber? Brandon sneered, holding a crystal champagne flute, while 200 of Chicago's wealthiest elites laughed at my mismatched suit. The chandeliers of the Drake Hotel glittered above us, but the air was thick with the stench of humiliation. I did not tremble. I did not stutter. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I was not reaching for a comb. I was reaching for a gold badge that had not seen the light of day in 20 years. The room went silent. The phone in Brandon's pocket began to ring, and the caller ID displayed the private line of the FBI director. And just like that, Brandon's smile died. My name is Oscar Hayes. I am 68 years old, and for the last 2 decades the world has known me as nothing more than the old man who sweeps hair off the floor at Hayes Cuts on the South Side. They see the calluses on my hands and the gray in my beard, and they assume I am slow. They assume I am weak. They assume I am just another relic of a bygone era trying to survive on a pension and tips. That is exactly what I wanted them to think. When you have spent half your life hunting the most dangerous financial criminals in the hemisphere, you learn that being invisible is the only armor that works. But tonight at my daughter's engagement party, my invisibility was about to be stripped away. Before I tell you how I brought down an empire with a pair of scissors and a federal warrant, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by someone who thought their money made them a god. The Gold Coast room at the Drake Hotel is not a place for a man like me. It is a place of marble columns and velvet drapes, a place where the air conditioning feels like it costs more than my rent. I stood near the entrance clutching a small white envelope. My suit was clean, but it was old. It was the same charcoal suit I wore to my wife Lucille's funeral 5 years ago. I could feel the fabric pulling tight across my shoulders. I knew I looked out of place. I looked like a stain on a silk sheet. My daughter Kendra looked like an angel. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my car. She was laughing at something Brandon said, her hand resting on his arm. Brandon Miller, my future son-in-law. He was 32 years old with teeth that were too white and a handshake that was too loose. He ran a venture capital firm that seemed to make millions of dollars out of thin air. To Kendra, he was a genius. To me, he was a walking red flag. I had spent the last week preparing for this night. I had emptied my savings account. I had cashed in the small bonds Lucille and I had bought in the 90s. I had sold the vintage Barber chair that my father left me. I scraped together $50,000. It was a cashier's check. To the people in this room, $50,000 was probably what they spent on a weekend in the Hamptons. But for me, it was blood and sweat. It was 20 years of standing on my feet for 10 hours a day. It was 20 years of $15 haircuts. It was clean money. It was honest money. I wanted to give it to them quietly. I wanted to slip it into Kendra's hand and tell her to use it for a down payment on a house or to keep it safe for a rainy day. But Brandon had insisted on a public presentation of gifts. He wanted a show. He wanted a spectacle. I watched as Brandon's parents gave them the keys to a brand new Porsche. The crowd cheered. I watched as his business partners gave them stocks and bonds. The crowd gasped. Then Brandon took the microphone. The spotlight hit him, and he soaked it up like a lizard on a rock. And now Brandon announced, his voice booming through the speakers. We have a very special guest, my future father-in-law, Mr. Oscar Hayes. The spotlight swung to me. I blinked against the harsh glare. The room went quiet. I could hear the ice clinking in glasses. I walked forward. My knee was aching, a reminder of a bullet fragment I took in a raid in Miami back in '98. I tried to walk tall. I walked up the stairs to the stage. Brandon put his arm around my shoulder. His suit was Italian silk. My suit was polyester blend. The contrast was cruel, and he knew it. So Oscar, Brandon said into the microphone, his voice dripping with fake warmth, "What have you brought us tonight? Did you bring your scissors? Are you going to give us all a trim?" A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Kendra looked down at her shoes. She looked ashamed. Not of him, but of me. That hurt more than the bullet in my knee. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. I handed it to him. "This is for you and Kendra," I said, my voice steady. "It is not much, but it is everything I have." Brandon took the envelope. He opened it with a dramatic flourish. He pulled out the check. He looked at the number. He paused. The silence stretched out. I thought for a second that maybe he was touched. I thought maybe he understood the sacrifice. Then he laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. He held the check up to the light as if he were inspecting a counterfeit bill. $50,000, he announced to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Oscar. He must have swept a lot of floors to scrape this together. The crowd chuckled. It was a nervous sound, but they were following his lead. You know, Oscar. Brandon continued, lowering the microphone slightly but keeping it loud enough for everyone to hear. This is cute. Really, it is adorable. But this is a venture capital gala. The champagne we are drinking tonight cost more than this check. He flicked the check with his finger. It made a crisp snapping sound. You keep it, he said. He tossed the check back at me. It hit my chest and fluttered to the floor. Use it to buy some new clothes. Or maybe fix up that little shop of yours. It is an eyesore, Oscar. A real eyesore. I stood there. The check lay at my feet. I could feel the heat rising in my neck. I could feel the old instinct, the instinct of the agent who had taken down cartels and killers waking up in my gut. I wanted to break his wrist. I knew exactly how to do it. It would take less than a second. I could dislocate his shoulder and crush his windpipe before his security team even moved. But I did nothing. I bent down. My knees cracked audibly in the silence. I picked up the check. I put it back in my pocket. I am sorry it is not enough, I said quietly. Oh, do not be sorry, Brandon said, clapping me on the back hard. You are who you are, Oscar. You are a barber. You cut hair. You sweep up dirt. That is your place in the world, and that is fine. Someone has to serve the people who actually matter. He turned back to the crowd. Let us hear it for the working class, everyone. The applause was polite but dismissive. They were clapping for me like I was a performing animal. I turned to leave the stage. As I walked past Brandon, he leaned in close. The microphone was down. No one else could hear him. Listen to me, old man, he hissed, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. Enjoy that shop while you can. After the wedding, I am bulldozing it. I need a parking lot for my new development. So start packing your razors. He pulled back and smiled a winning, camera-ready smile. I walked off the stage. The walk back to the exit felt like a mile. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel their pity and their disdain. But as I reached the heavy double doors, I stopped. I turned back one last time. I was not looking at Brandon. I was not looking at Kendra. I was looking at a man sitting in the shadows of the back corner table. He was wearing a silver suit. He had a scar running down the left side of his chin. He was not clapping. He was watching Brandon with the cold, dead eyes of a shark. I knew that face. I had not seen it in 20 years, but you never forget a face like that. That was Julian Varga. In 1998, he was the chief launderer for the Sinaloa cartel. I had spent 3 years under deep cover trying to get close enough to arrest him, but he vanished before we could spring the trap. And now he was here, at my daughter's engagement party, drinking with my son-in-law. My heart slowed down. The humiliation evaporated. The anger turned into something cold and sharp. Brandon thought he was just a rich bully picking on a poor old barber. He thought he had won. He thought he had crushed me. He had no idea what he had just done. He had not just insulted a father-in-law. He had woken up a sleeping dragon. I pushed open the doors and walked out into the cool Chicago night. I did not go to my car. I walked to a payphone on the corner. I have a cell phone, but old habits die hard, and I knew this call could not be traced. I dialed a number I had memorized a lifetime ago. It rang 4 times. Yeah, a gruff voice answered. It is Red Barber, I said. There was a long silence on the other end. Oscar, the voice asked, is that you? We thought you were dead. I am not dead, I said, watching the lights of the Drake Hotel glittering in the distance. But I'm about to go back to work. I need a file on Brandon Miller, and I need to know why Julian Varga is in Chicago. Welcome back to the game, Oscar, the voice said. I hung up the phone. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I was not just a barber anymore. The haircut was over. It was time for a close shave. The silence of my house was usually my best friend. Since Lucille passed away 5 years ago, silence was the only thing that filled the empty spaces she left behind. It was a comfortable silence. It smelled like old books and lemon polish. But 3 days after the honeymoon ended, that silence was shattered by the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway. The noise was aggressive. It rattled the window panes in their frames. I pulled back the curtain of my living room window. A massive moving truck blocked out the morning sun, casting a long shadow over my front lawn. The side of the truck had a generic logo, but the men jumping out of the cab looked more like prison inmates than professional movers. I did not call for movers. I walked to the front door and opened it just as Brandon Miller walked up my steps. He did not knock. He did not ask to come in. He simply walked past me as if I were a doorman at one of his hotels. He was wearing a casual polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He was talking on his phone and he did not even look at me. "Put the boxes in the master bedroom," he barked into the phone. "And be careful with the golf clubs. If you scratch them, I will sue your company into bankruptcy." He hung up and finally acknowledged my presence. He flashed that same fake smile from the engagement party, the smile that did not reach his eyes. "Morning, Oscar. Surprise." I looked past him. Kendra was walking up the path. She looked exhausted. Her skin was pale and she was dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase that looked too heavy for her. She did not look like a woman who had just returned from a week in Bora Bora. She looked like someone who had been running a marathon. "What is going on, Brandon?" I asked, standing my ground in the hallway. "Why is there a moving truck on my lawn?" Brandon laughed. It was a dismissive sound. He walked into the living room and began looking around, criticizing the furniture with his eyes. "Minor change of plans, Oscar. The penthouse is undergoing some emergency renovations. A pipe burst. Can you believe it? A $10 million apartment and the plumbing is garbage. We are going to crash here for a few weeks until the contractors fix it." He did not ask. He stated it. It was an invasion disguised as a family visit. Kendra finally reached the door. I moved to help her with the bag, but Brandon snapped his fingers. "Leave it, Oscar. The movers will get it. Kendra, honey, come sit down. You look terrible." Kendra gave me a weak smile. "Hi, Daddy. I am sorry about this. It all happened so fast. Brandon said it would be better if we stayed with family instead of a hotel. He said you must be lonely." I looked at my daughter. I saw the hesitation in her eyes. I saw the way she looked at Brandon for approval before she spoke. He was already rewriting the narrative. He was using my loneliness as a weapon. "I am not lonely," I said quietly, "and this house is small. Brandon, it is a 2-bedroom bungalow. It is not built for 3 people. Brandon waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. "We will make it work. We are family, right? Family makes sacrifices. Besides, we really just need the master bedroom. You can take the guest room, or the sofa, whatever works. The master bedroom. That was my room. That was the room I shared with Lucille for 40 years. Her perfume bottles were still on the vanity. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I had not moved them. I could not move them. You are not taking the master bedroom," I said. My voice dropped an octave. It was the voice I used when I interrogated suspects. The voice that meant there was no room for negotiation. Brandon stopped pacing. He turned to me. The smile vanished. "Excuse me," he said. "I said you are not taking that room. You can have the guest room." Brandon looked at Kendra. He sighed a long, exaggerated sigh. "See, Kendra, I told you he would be difficult. I try to be the good son-in-law. I try to bring us closer together. And this is the thanks I get. He wants us to sleep in that cramped guest room on a mattress that smells like mothballs." He walked over to Kendra and put his hands on her shoulders. He massaged her neck, but his grip looked tight. Too tight. "Honey, tell your father. Tell him about your back. Tell him how much pain you are in after the flight. Do you really think you can sleep in the guest room?" Kendra looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. She looked trapped. "Daddy, please. It is just for a little while. My back is really hurting. And the master bedroom has the firm mattress." I looked at Brandon. He was staring at me over her head, challenging me. He was using her pain to get what he wanted. If I said no, I was the bad father. If I said yes, I was losing my sanctuary. "Fine," I said. "I will move my things to the guest room." Brandon smirked. "Good. I knew you would be reasonable." "Hey, you two," he shouted at the movers who were hauling a large flat-screen TV into the house. "Start clearing out the master bedroom. Everything goes. We need space for my desk." I froze. "Everything goes." "Wait," I said. I stepped forward. "You are not clearing out anything. You are sleeping there. You are not redecorating." Brandon ignored me. He pointed to the corner of the living room. "And that thing. That chair. Get rid of it. It smells like a nursing home." He was pointing at Lucille's chair. It was a floral wingback chair. The fabric was faded pink roses. The armrests were worn down where she used to rest her elbows while she read her mystery novels. It was not just a piece of furniture. It was her. It was the place she sat when she held Kendra as a baby. It was the place she sat when she told me she was sick. 2 movers grabbed the chair. "Put that down," I said. I moved fast. faster than an old barber should move. I grabbed the wrist of the mover on the left. I applied pressure to the ulnar nerve. It was a subtle move, but effective. The man gasped and dropped his side of the chair. "Hey, watch it, old man," the mover growled. Brandon stepped in between us. He was not intimidated, he was amused. "Whoa, easy there, Rambo." "What is your problem, Oscar? It is just a chair. It is full of dust mites. Kendra has allergies. You do not want to kill her, do you?" He was doing it again. He was using Kendra as a shield. "Kendra does not have allergies," I said. "She grew up with this chair." Kendra stood up. She looked like she was about to cry. "Daddy, please. Brandon says the dust is bad for my sinuses. He is just trying to protect me. Just let it go. Please. I will buy you a new chair. A better one." I looked at my daughter. She was trembling. She was terrified of a conflict. She was terrified of him. If I fought this, if I snapped Brandon's wrist like I wanted to, he would twist it. He would tell her I was violent. He would tell her I was dangerous. He would take her away and I would never see her again. I had to lose the battle to win the war. I had to let them take the territory so I could learn the terrain. I let go of the mover's arm. I stepped back. "Fine," I said. My voice was hollow. "Do what you want." Brandon clapped his hands. "Excellent. Get it out of here, boys. Toss it in the dumpster out back." I stood by the window and watched. I watched as they carried Lucille's chair out the front door. I watched as they walked it to the large construction dumpster they had dropped on the curb. They did not place it gently. They threw it. I watched the chair tumble. I saw the wooden legs snap as it hit the metal bottom of the dumpster. I heard the crack. It sounded like a bone breaking. I felt a cold rage spreading through my chest. It was a familiar feeling. It was the fuel that had kept me alive during undercover operations. It was the feeling of absolute focus. Brandon walked up behind me. He stood close enough that I could smell his cologne. It was musky and expensive. "Don't pout, Oscar," he whispered. "It is time to modernize. Out with the old, in with the new. By the way, the guest room is full of Kendra's shoe collection. We did not have enough closet space in the master." He paused, letting the insult sink in. "You can sleep on the sofa. It looks comfortable enough for you. Besides, old people do not sleep much anyway, right?" He patted my shoulder. It was a patronizing tap. "Make sure you keep the noise down in the mornings. I have conference calls starting at 9. I do not want to hear you making coffee or watching your little game shows." He turned and walked away. I heard him whistling as he walked up the stairs. My stairs. He walked into the master bedroom and slammed the door. I stayed in the living room. The movers finished their work and left. The house was full of boxes that did not belong to me. The air smelled different. The scent of lavender and old books was gone. It was replaced by the smell of Brandon's cologne and the stale air of entitlement. Night fell. The house was dark. I lay on the sofa. It was lumpy and too short for my frame. My knee throbbed. I stared at the ceiling. I could hear them upstairs. I could hear heavy footsteps pacing back and forth in the master bedroom. I could hear Brandon's voice. It was muffled, but it was angry. He was shouting at someone on the phone. I closed my eyes and focused. I tuned out the hum of the refrigerator. I tuned out the traffic outside. I focused on the voice. "Where is the transfer?" he was shouting. "I do not care about the Cayman accounts. I need the liquidity now. If they trace the shell company, we are all dead." I opened my eyes in the dark. Renovations. That was the lie, a burst pipe. That was the cover. Men like Brandon Miller do not move into a small bungalow on the south side because of plumbing. They move because they are hiding. They move because they are running out of money. They move because they need an address that is not flagged by the IRS. He had thrown out Lucille's chair to show me he was in charge. He had put me on the sofa to break my spirit. He thought he had conquered me. But he had made a mistake, a fatal tactical error. He had moved his criminal operation into the home of a forensic accountant. He had moved his secrets into a house that I knew better than the back of my hand. He thought I was sleeping on the sofa. I was not sleeping. I was listening. I was memorizing the rhythm of his footsteps. I was analyzing the tone of his voice. I turned over on the sofa. The springs creaked. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. "Enjoy the bedroom, Brandon," I thought. "Enjoy the big bed. Because while you sleep, I am going to be awake, and tomorrow I am going to start taking my house back brick by brick." The invasion was legal. The papers were signed, but the occupation was going to be a nightmare. Not for me, but for him. The descent into hell was exactly 12 steps. They were wooden steps warped by time and moisture that groaned under my weight as if complaining about the intrusion. I carried my few remaining belongings in a black trash bag because Brandon had not allowed me to bring my dresser. He stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted by the warm golden light of the hallway. He looked like a prison warden watching an inmate go to solitary confinement. "This is for the best. Oscar," he called down, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "The light from the upstairs is much better for my work. I need the guest room for my monitors. Down there you will have peace and quiet. You like quiet, do you not?" He did not wait for an answer. He closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I was left in the semi-darkness. The basement was not a living space. It was a utility grave. The air smelled of wet concrete and rust. The only light came from a small, grime-covered window high up near the ceiling that looked out onto the dirt of the garden beds. I looked around my new kingdom. My bed was an old folding cot pushed up against the cinder block wall. It was next to the furnace, which hummed and rattled like a dying animal. There was a single bare bulb hanging from a wire in the center of the room. I pulled the string. The light flickered on, casting long, harsh shadows that made the spider webs in the rafters look like nets waiting to catch prey. For the first 2 days, I played the role of the defeated old man perfectly. I sat on the cot staring at the wall. I shuffled around in my slippers. I coughed. I let my shoulders slump. When Kendra came down to bring me a tray of food, she cried. She told me she was sorry. She told me it was temporary. I patted her hand and told her not to worry. I did not tell her that the dampness was making the shrapnel in my knee scream in agony. I did not tell her that I could hear rats scratching inside the walls. If I complained, Brandon would just send me to the nursing home. I needed to be here. I needed to be close to the enemy. On the 3rd day, the real game began. I was sitting on my cot reading an old newspaper when the door at the top of the stairs opened. Brandon walked down. He was holding a ladder and a small white box. He was whistling. He set the ladder up in the corner of the room directly opposite my cot. "What are you doing, Brandon?" I asked, making my voice sound thin and raspy. "Safety measures." "Oscar," he said, climbing the ladder. "Kendra is worried about you down here all alone. What if you fall? What if you have a heart attack? We would not hear you upstairs." He pulled a cordless drill from his belt. The sound of the drill biting into the wooden beam was sharp and violent. He mounted a small white camera in the corner. It was a sleek, modern device with a black lens that looked like a pupil-less eye. "There," he said, descending the ladder and wiping his hands on his pants. "It connects to my phone. Now we can check on you anytime. It has motion sensors and night vision. It is for your own protection." He pulled out his smartphone and tapped the screen. The little red light on the camera blinked on. "Wave to the camera, Oscar," he said, smirking. I raised my hand slowly and waved. I looked like a feeble old man saying goodbye to his dignity. "Perfect," Brandon said. "Now we will know if you try to sneak extra cookies." He laughed at his own joke and went back upstairs. As soon as the door closed, I dropped the act. My posture straightened. My eyes sharpened. I looked up at the camera. Brandon thought he had put me in a cage. He thought he had put me under a microscope. He was an amateur. He had bought a consumer-grade surveillance camera off the internet and thought it made him the director of the CIA. Every camera lens has a geometry. Every lens has a field of view, and every field of view has a blind spot. I spent 10 minutes walking around the basement watching the red light. I shuffled aimlessly, moving from the furnace to the washing machine to the cot. I was mapping the perimeter. The camera was a wide-angle lens. That meant it distorted the edges of the room but covered a large area. However, because of the way he had mounted it high in the corner, there was a dead zone directly underneath it, a triangular space of about 4 feet where the lens could not see. It was a small space, it was dusty and full of old paint cans, but it was invisible. For the next week, I established a pattern. The intelligence community calls it setting a baseline. I woke up at 7, I sat on the cot, I read, I napped at 2, I went to sleep at 9. I gave Brandon hours of boring footage. I became background noise. I became a piece of furniture. I knew he was watching because sometimes the red light would pulse when he accessed the live feed. I would scratch my head or adjust my socks, giving him the show of mediocrity he wanted. But at night, the basement became my operations center. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The house was silent. The red light on the camera was steady, meaning it was recording, but he was not watching live. I rolled out of my cot. I did not stand up. I crawled. I kept my body low below the sweep of the motion sensor. I moved like a shadow across the concrete floor until I reached the corner. I slid into the blind spot beneath the camera. I took a deep breath. I was now invisible. Behind the furnace, there was a section of the wall that looked like solid brick. It was stained with decades of soot. To the naked eye, it was just part of the foundation. But 3 days ago, while pretending to clean spider webs, I had loosened the mortar. I used a small metal spoon I had stolen from the dinner tray to pry the brick loose. It slid out with a soft grinding sound. Behind it was a hollow space. I reached in. My hand brushed against cold plastic. I pulled out a heavy black case. It was a Panasonic Toughbook, the military-grade laptop I had kept since my retirement. It was thick, heavy, and indestructible. It was not connected to the cloud. It did not have games. It was a weapon. I sat on the floor in the blind spot, my back against the cold wall. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed with a faint blue light. I typed in a password that was 24 characters long. Access granted. I did not have internet access down here, or so Brandon thought. The Wi-Fi router was on the floor directly above me in the living room. The signal bled through the floorboards perfectly. I did not need the password. I had a packet sniffer program that I had written myself in '99. It was old code but effective against modern civilian routers which were notoriously insecure. I watched the lines of code scroll down the screen. Intercepting handshake. Decrypting. Connected. I was in. I was on Brandon's network. I did not go for his browser history. I went for the router logs. I wanted to know where the data was going. I saw connections to servers in New York, London, and Zurich. That was normal for a finance guy. But then I saw something else. Every night at 3 a.m, a massive packet of encrypted data was sent to a server with an IP address that did not resolve to any public domain. I traced the hop. It bounced from a server in Miami to a server in Panama and finally rested in a secure data center in Belize. Belize. The graveyard of dirty money. I bypassed the encryption on his local drive. It was child's play. His password was his birthday followed by the word money. The arrogance of the man was his biggest vulnerability. I opened his financial folders. My eyes scanned the spreadsheets. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It was worse than I thought. He was not just spending Kendra's money, he was washing money. I saw transfers of $200,000 labeled as consulting fees coming from shell companies that I recognized. These were companies associated with the reimagined remnants of the cartel I had fought years ago. They were using my son-in-law as a laundry machine. And then I saw the transfer scheduled for tomorrow. $5 million. It was labeled Project Phoenix. The source of the funds was a secure loan taken out against the deed to my house and Kendra's life insurance policy. He was going to drain everything. He was going to take the $5 million, send it to Belize, and then disappear. He would leave Kendra with nothing but debt and a foreclosure notice. I looked at the date on the transfer. It was set to execute in 48 hours. I closed the laptop. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I slid the computer back into the hole in the wall and replaced the brick. I smeared some dust over the cracks to hide the tampering. I crawled back to my cot. I pulled the thin blanket over my shoulders. I looked up at the camera. The red light blinked at me. Brandon was sleeping upstairs in my bed, dreaming of his millions. He thought he was the predator. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He was watching me, but he was not seeing me. He had put me in the basement to bury me. But he had forgotten one thing about basements. They are the foundation of the house. And if you know where to strike, you can bring the whole house down. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I began to formulate the plan. I needed to stop that transfer, but I could not just call the police. The local police would not understand the complexity of offshore layering. They would investigate, Brandon would lawyer up, and the money would vanish before an arrest warrant was even signed. I needed to go higher. I needed to activate the ghost protocol. The next morning, I shuffled up the stairs for breakfast. Brandon was in the kitchen drinking an espresso. He looked fresh and energized. "Sleep well, Oscar?" he asked, not looking up from his tablet. "I slept like a baby," I mumbled, pouring myself a cup of lukewarm water. "Good," Brandon said. "By the way, I have a big gala coming up in 2 days. I want you to be there. It looks good for the family image if we take care of our elders. Try to find a suit that does not smell like mothballs." I sipped my water. My hand shook intentionally, spilling a few drops on the counter. I will try my best. Brandon, I said. I will be there, I thought. And I will be wearing a suit. But it won't be the one you expect. And when the night ends, you won't be worrying about your image. You will be praying for a lawyer. I turned away to hide the glint in my eyes. The basement had not broken me. It had sharpened me. The camera had not trapped me. It had given me the perfect alibi. Let the boy play his games. The barber was about to give him a close shave he would never forget. The tea smelled like bergamot and betrayal. Brandon brought it to me on a silver tray while I was sitting in the corner of the living room pretending to read a gardening magazine. The china cup was delicate, the kind Lucille used to save for Easter Sunday, but the hand holding it was predatory. Brandon never served me. He barely acknowledged my existence unless he was mocking me. So when he walked over with a steaming cup and a smile that looked like a rictus of concern, I knew the game had shifted. "Here you go, Oscar," Brandon said, his voice dripping with synthetic honey. "You looked a little pale down in that basement. I thought some Earl Grey would perk you up." I took the cup. My fingers brushed against his and his skin was cold. I brought the cup to my lips and inhaled. To the average person, it smelled like tea. But to a nose that had spent 20 years sniffing out meth labs and chemical processing plants in the jungle, it smelled like danger. Underneath the floral notes of the bergamot, there was a faint, almost imperceptible acrid scent. It was bitter and metallic. Scopolamine. The street name is Devil's Breath. In high doses, it turns you into a zombie, wiping your memory and making you compliant to any command. In low doses, it makes you confused, docile, and clumsy. It mimics the early stages of rapid onset dementia. Brandon was not just trying to drug me, he was trying to erase me. He needed me to be incompetent so he could take control legally. I looked up at him. He was watching me closely, his blue eyes dilated with anticipation. He was waiting for me to drink. If I refused, he would know I was on to him. If I drank it, I was finished. I raised the cup. I tipped it back. I let the hot liquid flow into my mouth, but I did not swallow. I held the scalding tea under my tongue, engaging the muscles in my throat to make a gulping sound. "Thank you, Brandon," I said, my voice slightly muffled by the liquid I was hiding in my cheek. "That hits the spot." I waited for him to turn away. He walked toward the kitchen to check on dinner. The second his back was turned, I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket. I pretended to wipe my mouth, but instead I spat the liquid into the thick cotton fabric. I folded the handkerchief quickly and shoved it deep into my pocket. My gums burned where the tea had touched them. Even that small amount of contact was enough to make my head swim slightly. Scopolamine is potent. I needed to act fast. I needed to sell the symptoms he was expecting. 10 minutes later, we were seated at the dining table. The atmosphere was suffocating. Kendra had cooked a pot roast, but she was not eating. She was watching me with worry etched into her forehead. Brandon sat at the head of the table, the king of his stolen castle. "How are you feeling, Oscar?" Brandon asked, cutting his meat with surgical precision. I stared at my soup. I let my eyelids droop. I allowed my hand to develop a rhythmic tremor. I picked up my spoon. It clattered against the bowl. I picked it up again, and this time I let it slip from my fingers completely. It splashed into the tomato bisque, sending red droplets onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh, Dad." Kendra gasped, reaching out to me. "Are you okay?" I looked at her blankly. I made my eyes lose focus. I looked through her, not at her. "I do not know." I mumbled, slurring my words intentionally. "I feel heavy. My hands. I cannot feel my hands." Brandon sighed loud and long. He put down his knife and fork. "See, Kendra, this is what I was telling you about. It is getting worse." Kendra looked from me to Brandon. Her eyes were filling with tears. "But he was fine this morning," she said. "He was reading. He was normal." "Sundowning," Brandon said, using a term he had probably looked up on Wikipedia 5 minutes ago. "It happens with dementia patients. They are fine during the day, but as soon as the sun sets, they lose cognitive function. Look at him, Kendra. He does not even know where he is." I played my part. I looked around the room with exaggerated confusion. I tried to stand up and then slumped back down into the chair. "Where is Lucille?" I asked, calling out to my dead wife. "Why is dinner not ready?" Kendra put her hand over her mouth. A sob escaped her throat. It broke my heart to do this to her, to make her believe her father was fading away. But I had to let Brandon think he had won. I had to let him overplay his hand. "We cannot keep doing this," Kendra. Brandon said, his voice firm but fake sympathetic. "It is dangerous. What if he leaves the gas on? What if he wanders out into the street? We need to take control, for his own safety. He reached under his chair and pulled out a leather briefcase. He had it ready. He had been planning this moment since he moved in. He pulled out a stack of documents. They were thick legal papers bound with a blue cover. I had my lawyer draw these up, Brandon said, sliding the papers across the table toward me. It is a power of attorney. It gives me full authority to manage his finances, his health care, and his assets. It means we can put him in a specialized facility where he can get the help he needs, and we can sell this house to pay for his care. Kendra hesitated. I do not know, Brandon. It feels so permanent. Should we not talk to a doctor first? We do not have time for doctors, Brandon snapped, losing his composure for a fraction of a second. Look at him. He is a vegetable. Do you want him to burn the house down with us inside? Sign the papers, Oscar. He thrust a pen into my trembling hand. I looked at the paper. The words swam before my eyes, not because of the drug, but because of the rage that was boiling in my blood. General power of attorney. Transfer of title. It was a complete liquidation of my life. Sign it, Brandon commanded. Sign it, and you can go lie down. I gripped the pen. My hand shook violently. This was the moment. The trap within the trap. In the FBI, we have protocols for everything. We have protocols for extraction, protocols for engagement, and protocols for duress. When an agent is captured and forced to sign a confession or a document, there is a way to signal to the agency that the signature is invalid. It is subtle. To the untrained eye, it looks like a normal signature. But to a forensic handwriting analyst, it screams coercion. I lowered the pen to the paper. I wrote my name, Oscar Hayes. The letters were shaky, consistent with an old man suffering from neurological decline. But then I did the underline. For 40 years, I have signed my name with a single straight underline that starts at the H and ends at the S. It is my trademark. Tonight, I did not draw a straight line. I drew a line that looped back on itself in the middle, forming a tiny, almost invisible figure 8, before continuing to the end. The figure 8 is the universal signal for a compromised agent. In legal terms, specifically within the Bureau investigation logs, it denotes that the signer is under extreme duress and the document is void ab initio, meaning it was invalid from the moment it was signed. I finished the signature and let the pen drop from my hand. I slumped forward, letting my chin hit my chest. Good, Brandon said, snatching the papers away before the ink was even dry. He checked the signature. He saw the name. He did not see the loop. He saw the victory. He did not see the warrant he had just signed for his own arrest. He smiled at Kendra. It is done. Now we can take care of him properly. He stood up and walked to the sideboard, pouring himself a celebratory drink. He did not offer one to Kendra. I stood up. I made my legs wobble. Bathroom, I mumbled. Sick. Go ahead, Oscar, Brandon said, waving his hand dismissively. Try not to make a mess. I stumbled out of the dining room. I used the wall to support myself, dragging my feet along the carpet. I heard Kendra asking if she should help me, but Brandon held her back. Let him go, he said. He needs to maintain some dignity. I reached the hallway bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the tap full blast to cover the sound. I gripped the porcelain sink. The adrenaline was fading, and the small amount of scopolamine that had absorbed into my gums was starting to hit me. My vision blurred at the edges. My knees felt like water. I forced myself to retch. I shoved my finger down my throat and purged my stomach just in case any of the tea had slipped down. I rinsed my mouth with cold water, splashing it on my face. The shock of the cold helped clear the fog. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red. My skin was gray. I looked like a dying man. But inside, the fire was burning hotter than ever. I had given him the paper. He thought he owned me now. He thought he owned the house, the bank accounts, and the barber shop. He would file that document tomorrow morning. He would use it to authorize the transfer of the $5 million to Belize. But that document was a time bomb. Once the FBI saw that signature, they would know that everything Brandon did from this moment on was an act of fraud and elder abuse committed against a federal asset. I unlocked the bathroom door. I shuffled back out into the hallway. I could hear Brandon on the phone in the living room. He was not whispering anymore. Yeah, it is signed, he was saying. Upload the authorization. We moved the funds at 9 a.m. The old man is cooked. He is out of the picture. I walked past the living room door. I did not look at him. I went to the basement door and opened it. I descended the 12 steps into the dark. I sat on my cot and listened to the furnace hum. I was not cooked. I was just marinating. Tomorrow the money would move, and when money moves, it leaves tracks. Brandon had the keys to the kingdom, but he did not know that I had changed the locks a long time ago. I lay back on the pillow. I closed my eyes. The image of Kendra's tearful face burned in my mind. I would make him pay for every tear she shed. I would make him pay for the tea. I would make him pay for the chair. I am Oscar Hayes. I am not a vegetable. I am the man who is going to harvest this weed and pull it out by the roots. Sleep well, Brandon, I whispered to the darkness, because tomorrow the barber is coming to work, and I have a very sharp razor. Hayes Cuts on 47th Street was not just a barber shop. It was a sanctuary of black vinyl and chrome where time moved slower than the traffic outside. The air always smelled the same. It was a mixture of talcum powder bay rum and the faint metallic tang of hair clippers cooling down. I was sweeping the floor. It was a Tuesday evening and the shop was closed. I liked the rhythm of the broom. It was meditative. Swish and pause. Swish and pause. It reminded me of the rhythm of a surveillance operation where you spend hours doing nothing, just waiting for the target to make a mistake. I was gathering the last pile of hair into the dustpan when the bell above the door jingled. It was not a polite chime. It was a jarring sound because the door had been shoved open with force. I did not look up immediately. I kept my eyes on the dustpan, but my peripheral vision expanded. I saw 3 pairs of heavy boots. I saw denim jeans. I saw hands that were balled into fists. "We are closed," I said calmly. My voice was the voice of the old barber. It was raspy and tired. "We are not here for a haircut, Pop," a voice boomed. It was deep and gravelly, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who smoked too much and thought too little. I straightened up slowly. I leaned on my broom, using it as a cane. There were 3 of them. They were big. They were the kind of hired muscle you could find in any dive bar in Chicago if you had $500 and no moral compass. The leader was in the middle. He was wearing a leather jacket that was too tight across his chest. He had a crowbar tapping rhythmically against his thigh. I looked at the crowbar. I looked at their spacing. They were standing too close together. They were confident. They thought they were walking into a sheep pen. They did not know they had just walked into a lion's den. "Brandon sent you," I said. It was not a question. The leader laughed. It was an ugly sound. "We do not know any Brandon, old man. We are just concerned citizens. We heard this building is unsafe. We heard it might fall down. We are here to help the demolition process start early." He swung the crowbar. It smashed into the first barber chair. The vinyl ripped open with a sound like a scream. The stuffing exploded into the air. That was my father's chair. He bought it in 1960. My heart rate did not spike. My breathing did not change. My mind shifted gears instantly. I was no longer Oscar the barber. I was Agent Hayes. I assessed the threat. 3 targets, armed with blunt force weapons, distance 8 feet. The leader stepped forward. He raised the crowbar again, aiming for the mirror. "Hey, Pop," he sneered. "Why do you not go sit in the corner while we work? Do not make us hurt you." I sighed. I let the broom fall from my hand. It clattered to the floor. "Please," I said, raising my hands in a gesture of surrender. "I do not want any trouble." "I am glad to hear that," the leader said. He turned his head slightly to nod at his goons. "Smash everything, boys." That was his mistake. He took his eyes off me for a fraction of a second. I was standing next to the towel steamer. It was an old industrial unit that kept 20 towels piping hot for shaves. I reached out and flipped the latch. I did not grab a towel. I grabbed the entire metal tray. I moved with a speed that defied my age. I pivoted on my good leg and flung the contents of the tray at the 2 men on the left. 6 scalding hot wet towels flew through the air like heavy white projectiles. They hit the men in the face. The steam billowed out. The heat was intense. The 2 men screamed. They clawed at their faces, blinded by the steam and the sudden pain. Their coordination vanished. They stumbled back, crashing into each other. The leader spun back around, his eyes wide with shock. He swung the crowbar at my head. It was a clumsy swing. It was wide and telegraphed. I did not retreat. I stepped inside his guard. I blocked his forearm with my left wrist, stopping the momentum of the swing before it could generate power. At the same time, I drove my right palm into his solar plexus. It was not a hard strike. It did not need to be. It was precise. I hit the nerve cluster that controls the diaphragm. The air rushed out of his lungs. He made a sound like a deflating tire. His knees buckled. I grabbed his wrist and twisted. The crowbar fell to the floor with a heavy clang. I spun him around and slammed him face first into the counter. I reached for the straight razor that was sitting in the jar of blue disinfectant. I flicked it open. The blade caught the light. It was a German steel blade honed to a molecular edge. I pressed the cold steel against the leader's neck right below his ear. "Freeze," I whispered. The other two men had pulled the hot towels off their faces. Their skin was red and blistering. They blinked, trying to clear their vision. They saw their boss pinned against the counter. They saw the old barber holding a razor with a hand that was steady as a rock. They froze. "Who sent you?" I asked. I pressed the blade a millimeter harder. A tiny bead of blood appeared on the leader's neck. "I do not know," the leader wheezed. "Just a guy. A suit. He paid us cash. Said to wreck the place. Said you would sell if the place was trashed." Brandon. I felt a surge of disgust. He was not just a thief. He was a coward who hired other men to do his violence. I could have finished it there. I could have broken their arms. I could have tied them up and waited for the police. But then I looked at the mirror. I saw my reflection. I saw an old man in a cardigan holding a razor like a special forces operator. My stance was perfect. My eyes were cold. If the police walked in right now, they would not see a victim. They would see a killer. They would run my prints. They would see the flagged files. My cover would be blown. Brandon would know I was not just a barber. He would panic, and he would run before the transfer was made. I had to lose. To win the war, I had to lose this battle. I pulled the razor away from the leader's neck. I folded it and put it back in the jar. "Get out," I said. The leader pushed himself off the counter. He looked at me with confusion and fear. He did not understand why he was still alive. "You heard me," I said. "Get out. Tell your boss the job is done." They did not wait. They scrambled for the door, tripping over their own feet. They ran out into the night, leaving the door swinging on its hinges. The shop was silent again. The chair was ruined. The mirror was intact. I looked around. It was not enough. It looked like I had scared them off. That was not the story I needed. I needed to be the victim. I needed to be the frail old man who was helpless against the violence of the world. I walked over to the wall. It was a brick wall painted a pale green. I took a deep breath. This was the part of the job they never put in the recruitment brochures. I closed my eyes. I threw my head forward. I slammed my forehead into the brick wall. The pain was blinding. A starburst of white light exploded behind my eyes. I fell to my knees. I felt the warm trickle of blood running down my eyebrow. It dripped onto the linoleum floor. I did not stop. I grabbed a bottle of shampoo and threw it against the mirror. The glass shattered. I overturned the table with the magazines. I kicked the dustpan across the room. I lay down on the floor amidst the broken glass and the hair clippings. I curled into a fetal position. I touched my head. The gash was deep. It was bleeding freely. Good. Head wounds always bleed a lot. It looks dramatic. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were shaking for real now. The concussion was setting in. I dialed 911. "Help me," I whispered when the operator answered. "They destroyed my shop. Please help me." 10 minutes later, the room was full of flashing blue and red lights. A young paramedic was dabbing at my forehead with gauze. A police officer was taking notes, looking bored. Then the door opened again. Brandon walked in. He was wearing a cashmere coat. He looked immaculate. He looked like a concerned relative who had rushed over upon hearing the news. "Oscar," he cried, rushing over to me. "Oh my God, are you okay?" I heard on the scanner app. I came as fast as I could. He knelt beside me. He looked at the blood on my face. He looked at the destroyed chair. He looked at the shattered mirror. For a second, the mask slipped. He smiled. It was a tiny smile, a micro-expression of triumph. "I told you, Oscar," he whispered, leaning in close so the police officer could not hear. "I told you this neighborhood was dangerous. Look at this place. It is a ruin." I looked up at him through my one good eye. The blood was stinging my eyelid. "They took everything, Brandon," I croaked. Brandon patted my shoulder. He stood up and looked around the shop with a look of mock sadness. "It is a sign, Oscar. You cannot keep doing this. You are too old. You cannot protect this place." He looked down at me. His shadow fell over my face. "Sell it, Oscar. I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. I will take this burden off your hands. We will bulldoze this mess and you can retire in peace. Just sign the papers and this nightmare ends." I closed my eyes. I let my head drop back against the paramedic's knee. "Maybe you are right, Brandon," I whispered. "Maybe I am too old. Brandon squeezed my shoulder. I am always right, Oscar. Just rest now. Leave the thinking to me. He walked away to talk to the police officer. I heard him saying something about dementia and unsafe working conditions. I lay there on the floor of my father's shop. My head was throbbing. My heart was cold. He thought he had broken me. He thought the blood on my face was a sign of defeat. He did not know that blood was ink, and I was writing his sentence with it. He wanted me to sell. He wanted the land. He wanted the money. He would get the papers tomorrow, but he would not be signing a deed. He would be signing a confession. I opened my eyes and looked at the broken mirror on the floor. In the shards of glass, I saw my reflection. The blood made me look savage. It made me look dangerous. The barber was dead. The agent was awake. And tomorrow the hunter becomes the hunted. Sunny Meadows sounded like a place where you went to retire and watch the sunset. In reality, it was a warehouse for the forgotten. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant, boiled cabbage, and despair. Brandon had dropped me off at the curb with a single suitcase and a pat on the back that felt more like a shove. He told the intake nurse that I was a flight risk and prone to violent outbursts. He paid for the cheapest room available, a semi-private cell at the end of a long hallway with flickering fluorescent lights. My roommate was a man named Mr. Henderson who spent his days staring at the ceiling and mumbling about a war that ended 50 years ago. I sat on the edge of my bed, which was covered in a plastic sheet that crinkled every time I moved. I looked at the window. It was barred. Not with decorative ironwork, but with heavy steel grating designed to keep the inmates inside. They took my shoes. That was the first thing they did to prevent wandering. The orderly was a man named Marcus, who had forearms like tree trunks and eyes that held zero compassion. He tossed my loafers into a bin and gave me a pair of non-slip hospital socks. "Do not try anything, Pops." Marcus had grunted. "The doors are alarmed. The gates are locked. You are here until your family says otherwise." I nodded meekly. I let my jaw hang slack. I let my hands tremble. I played the part of the discarded relic. But as soon as the lights went out at 9 p.m., I stopped shaking. I waited. Patience is the primary weapon of any operative. I waited for the shift change at 11. I waited for the night nurse to settle into her station with her romance novel. I waited for the heavy rhythmic snoring of Mr. Henderson to fill the room. At 2 a.m, the facility was silent. I slid out of bed, slid out. The hospital socks were actually an advantage. They were silent on the linoleum floor. I crept to the door of my room. It was not locked, but the hallway was the danger zone. I peeked out. The nurse's station was 50 feet away. The nurse was there, but her head was on the desk. She was asleep. I moved. I stayed low, hugging the wall where the shadows were deepest. My objective was the maintenance closet at the end of the east wing. During my intake tour, I had clocked the layout. The fire exit in the east wing was alarmed, but the service door in the maintenance closet which led to the loading dock usually was not. It was a common security flaw in low-budget facilities. Staff used it for smoke breaks, and they often disabled the alarm to avoid the noise. I reached the closet door. It was locked. A standard pin tumbler lock. Cheap. I did not have my lockpicks. Brandon had taken everything, but I had prepared. Earlier at dinner, I had pocketed a stiff metal fork. Back in the room, I had snapped off one of the tines and used the metal frame of the bed to bend it into a crude tension wrench. For the pick, I had used the metal clip from the patient chart hanging at the foot of my bed. I inserted the tension wrench. I applied light pressure. I slid the improvised pick into the keyway. I closed my eyes. I visualized the pins inside the lock. 1, click. 2, binding. 3, click. It took me 12 seconds. The lock turned. I opened the door slowly, praying the hinges were oiled. They squeaked faintly, but the sound was masked by the hum of the ventilation system. I slipped inside the closet. The smell of bleach was overpowering. I moved to the back door. I pushed the crash bar. The door opened. No alarm, no siren, just the rush of cold Chicago air. I stepped out onto the loading dock. I was free, but I was not safe. I was an old man in pajamas and hospital socks standing in an alley in the middle of the night. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows of the dumpsters. I found a pair of work boots that someone had discarded near the trash compactor. They were 2 sizes too big, but they were better than socks. I laced them up tight. I walked for 3 blocks. I did not run. Running attracts attention. A shuffling old man is invisible. A running old man is a target. I reached the rendezvous point. It was a 24-hour newsstand under the elevated train tracks. The train rattled overhead, shaking the ground and drowning out the city noise. A man was sitting on a milk crate, stacking bundles of tomorrow's papers. He wore a ragged coat and a beanie pulled down low. He had a gray beard that was stained with tobacco. To the world, he was Sarge, the homeless guy who sold papers for booze money. To me, he was Sergeant Major Thomas Miller, retired Marine Recon and the best quartermaster the Bureau had ever contracted. I walked up to the stand. I picked up a copy of the Sun-Times. "Paper is late tonight, Sarge," I said quietly. Sarge did not look up. He kept cutting the plastic straps on the bundles. "News is never late, Oscar," he rumbled. "It just waits for the right reader. You look like hell. Sunny Meadows does not suit you." "It has a certain charm," I said. "If you like prison food and urine, do you have the package?" Sarge reached into a stack of unsold sports magazines. He pulled out a brown paper bag that looked like it contained a sandwich. He slid it across the counter. I took the bag. It was heavy. I opened it slightly. Inside, wrapped in an oily cloth, was a Glock 26 subcompact. It was small, easily concealable, but lethal. Next to it was a small black box containing high-grade listening devices and a signal jammer. "And this," Sarge said, sliding a small envelope across the counter. I opened the envelope. Inside was a credit card with a fake name and $5,000 in cash. "That is from the Rainy Day Fund," Sarge said. I looked at him. "I cannot pay you back yet, Sarge. My accounts are frozen. Brandon has power of attorney." Sarge stopped cutting the straps. He looked up. His eyes were clear and sharp. "You do not owe me anything, sir." He emphasized the word sir. I froze. "Do not call me that, Sarge. I am retired." Sarge shook his head. "I got the call, Oscar, from the director. When you activated the emergency signal in the signature yesterday, the system flagged it. Level 6 clearance." I looked away. Level 6. It was a designation that did not officially exist. Level 5 was the highest public clearance. Level 6 was for assets who were considered deep cover ghosts, assets who had the authority to sanction operations without oversight in times of crisis. "I thought my clearance was revoked when I left," I said. "It was suspended," Sarge corrected. "Never revoked. Once a 6, always a 6. The director wants to know if you need an extraction team. We can have a tactical unit at Brandon's house in 10 minutes. We can pull him out and black bag him." I touched the cold steel of the gun inside the bag. "No," I said, "no extraction. This is personal. Brandon thinks I am a senile old man. He thinks he is playing chess with a pigeon. If you send in a team, he will lawyer up. He will hide the money. He will destroy Kendra. I have to do this my way, Sarge. I have to let him think he is winning until the very last second." Sarge nodded. He understood. "What about the girl?" he asked. "Your daughter. She is in the middle of the blast zone," I said. "I have to get her out before I detonate the charge." I tucked the paper bag into the waistband of my pajama pants, pulling my jacket tight to conceal it. "I need one more thing, Sarge." "Name it." "I need a suit, not a new one. I need a tuxedo. Vintage. Something that looks like it belongs in a museum but fits like armor." Sarge grinned. His gold tooth flashed in the dim streetlight. "I have just the thing. Left over from the diplomat operation in Vienna back in '89. It is in the back of the van." He handed me a garment bag. "Go get him, Oscar." I took the suit. I turned to leave. "Oscar," Sarge called out. I stopped. "Try not to get shot. The paperwork for a level 6 casualty is a nightmare." I smiled for the first time in days. "No promises, Sarge." I walked away from the newsstand. I blended into the shadows. The train roared overhead again. I was not going to run. I was not going to hide. I was going back to the house. I had broken out of the nursing home not to escape, but to rearm. Brandon thought he had discarded me. He thought I was locked away in a room with barred windows. He was wrong. I hailed a taxi on the next block. The driver looked at my hospital socks and the garment bag, but he did not say a word when I handed him a $100 bill from the envelope. "Take me to the suburbs," I said. I sat in the back seat and opened the brown bag. I checked the magazine of the Glock. It was full, hollow points. I looked out the window as the city sped by. I was going back to the basement. I was going back to the camera. But this time, I was not a prisoner. I was an infiltrator. When I walked back into that house tonight, I would be a ghost. And Brandon Miller was about to learn that you should never haunt a house that already has a monster living in the basement. The level 6 asset was active, and the mission was simple. Burn it all down. The taxi dropped me off 2 blocks away from 47th Street. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror with a mixture of pity and suspicion, but he took the $100 bill without a word. I stood on the sidewalk and buttoned the oversized work coat I had stolen from the loading dock. The air in Chicago at 4 in the morning has a bite to it. It is a wet cold that gets into your bones and reminds you of every injury you have ever sustained. My knee was throbbing and my heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced myself to walk. I needed to see it. I needed to see what they had done to my legacy. I turned the corner and the world stopped. For 40 years, Hayes Cuts had stood on that corner. It was a brick building with a large glass window and a red and white pole that spun lazily day and night. It was the place where I had cut my first head of hair. It was the place where I had hidden during the riots in '68. It was the place where I had taught Kendra how to count change in the register. It was not just a business. It was the anchor of my life. It was the only place where I was not Agent Hayes or a ghost or a widower. I was just Oscar. Now there was nothing. The streetlights illuminated a gaping wound in the neighborhood. The building was gone. Not just damaged, not just boarded up, but erased. A chain-link fence surrounded a muddy lot filled with piles of shattered brick and twisted rebar. A massive yellow excavator sat in the middle of the mud like a prehistoric beast, sleeping on the bones of its prey. The sign that my father had hand-painted was gone. The Barber chairs were gone. The smell of bay rum and talc was replaced by the smell of wet earth and diesel fuel. I walked up to the fence. My fingers gripped the cold metal wire. I felt a physical pain in my chest that was sharper than a heart attack. It felt like someone had reached inside me and ripped out my past. There was nothing left. No photos, no records, no sanctuary. I stood there for a long time staring at the void. I did not cry. Agents do not cry. We assess damage. We calculate loss. But this loss was incalculable. Then I saw him. A black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb on the other side of the lot. The headlights cut through the gloom. The door opened and Brandon Miller stepped out. He was not wearing construction gear. He was wearing a camel hair coat over a navy suit. His shoes were polished Italian leather that gleamed under the streetlights. He held a blueprint in one hand and a phone in the other. He looked like a king surveying his new territory. He looked at the pile of rubble that used to be my life and he nodded with satisfaction. I should have stayed in the shadows. I should have turned around and walked away. I had the gun in my waistband. I had the plan. I knew that confrontation now was risky. But rage is a funny thing. It overrides logic. It overrides training. I walked around the perimeter of the fence. There was a gap where the construction crew had driven the excavator in. I stepped through it. My stolen boots sank into the soft mud. The sound of my footsteps was swallowed by the wet earth. "Brandon," I said. My voice was low, but it carried across the empty lot. Brandon spun around. He dropped his phone. He looked at me, and for a second I saw fear in his eyes. He saw a figure in the mist, a ghost rising from the grave. But then the headlights of his car illuminated my face. He saw the hospital socks peeking out of the boots. He saw the bandage on my forehead. He saw the old man. The fear vanished instantly, replaced by annoyance. "Oscar." He sighed, picking up his phone. "Jesus Christ, you are like a bad penny. You just keep turning up." He walked toward me, picking his way carefully through the mud so he would not dirty his shoes. He stopped 5 feet away. The smell of his cologne wafted over the smell of the dirt. "How did you get out?" he asked. "I paid extra for the secure wing. I am going to sue that facility for incompetence." "You destroyed it," I said, pointing at the pile of bricks. "You destroyed everything." Brandon laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I did you a favor, Oscar. This place was a hazard. It was full of asbestos and lead paint. I am cleaning up the neighborhood. I am going to build a mixed-use complex here. Luxury condos with a coffee shop on the ground floor. It will increase property values. You should be thanking me." He took a step closer. His face twisted into a sneer. "But you do not understand property values, do you? You just understand cutting hair and sweeping floors. You are small, Oscar. You have always been small." I looked at him. I looked at the man who was sleeping in my house, driving my car, and spending my daughter's future. I saw the absolute lack of soul in his eyes. He did not care about the history of this place. He did not care that he had destroyed a community landmark. To him, it was just square footage. It was just a line item on a spreadsheet. "My father built this place," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "He built it with his bare hands when they would not give him a loan." And now I am tearing it down with my checkbook, Brandon countered. That is evolution, Oscar. The strong eat the weak, the rich eat the poor, and the smart eat the stupid. He poked me in the chest with a gloved finger. And you are stupid, Oscar. You signed the papers. You gave me everything. You are trespassing on my land. I slapped his hand away. It was a reflex. Do not touch me, I warned. Brandon's eyes widened. He was not used to resistance. He was used to people bowing down to his money. He was used to the old barber who looked at the floor. He stepped back and then he lunged forward. He swung his hand. It was not a fist. It was a slap. An open-handed backhand slap designed to humiliate. His leather glove connected with my cheek. The sound was loud in the quiet night, a sharp crack that echoed off the nearby buildings. The force of the blow caught me off guard. My bad knee buckled. I slipped in the mud. I fell hard. My hands plunged into the cold, wet earth. The slime seeped through my fingers. The cold water soaked into the knees of my pants. I stayed there on my hands and knees. My cheek burned. I could taste blood in my mouth where my tooth had cut my lip. Brandon stood over me. He loomed like a giant. Look at you, he spat. Look at you rolling in the dirt. That is where you belong, Oscar. You are nothing. You are a leech. You are an unwanted guest in my life. He kicked a spray of mud onto my coat. Go back to the nursing home, Oscar, or go sleep under a bridge. I do not care. But if I see you near my house or my wife again, I will have you committed to the state asylum. I will have you locked in a padded room where no one will ever hear you scream. He turned his back on me. He walked back to his car, wiping his glove with a handkerchief. Any last words, Barber? He called out over his shoulder, repeating the insult from the party. I did not answer. I looked down at the mud. I squeezed my right hand. The wet earth oozed between my fingers. It felt cold and heavy. It was the soil of the South Side. It was the soil my father had built on. It was the soil Lucille had walked on. I could have pulled the gun. I could have put a bullet in his spine before he reached the car door. It would have been easy. It would have been satisfying. But as I squeezed the mud, something inside me shifted. The last remnant of Oscar the Barber died in that dirt. The grief vanished. The shock vanished. The fear vanished. The man who knelt in the mud was no longer a father-in-law. He was no longer a victim. I was Agent Hayes, and I had just acquired the target. I did not stand up immediately. I watched him get into his car. I watched the taillights fade into the distance. I slowly opened my hand. I looked at the clump of mud in my palm. It was dark and dense. You made a mistake, Brandon, I whispered to the empty lot. You should have finished me. You should have put a bullet in my head while I was down. I pushed myself up. My knee screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I wiped the mud from my hands onto my coat. I stood tall. The slap still stung. Good. I wanted it to sting. I wanted to remember that pain. That pain was fuel. I looked at the excavator. I looked at the ruins. You think you destroyed my home, I thought. You just cleared the battlefield. I reached into my waistband and touched the handle of the Glock. It was dry and warm. I turned away from the lot. I did not look back. There was nothing left to mourn. The time for mourning was over. The time for hunting had begun. I walked back to the street. I did not limp. I marched. Brandon Miller had started a war. He thought he was fighting a senile old man. He thought he was fighting a ghost. He was about to find out that ghosts can hurt you, especially when they have nothing left to lose. I hailed another taxi, whereto the driver asked. Go north, I said, to the suburbs. I sat back in the seat. I watched the city lights blur. I touched my cheek. It was swelling. Game on, Brandon, I whispered. Game on. The ride to the house was long. I used the time to assemble the pieces in my mind. The money transfer was scheduled for 9 a.m. It was now 5 a.m. I had 4 hours. 4 hours to infiltrate the house. 4 hours to secure the evidence. 4 hours to get Kendra out. I closed my eyes and visualized the layout of the house. I visualized the camera in the basement. I visualized the safe in the bedroom. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the state of flow that elite athletes and snipers talk about. The world slows down, the noise fades away. There is only the objective. The objective was simple. Destruction, not of a building, but of a man. I checked my watch. The seconds ticked by with rhythmic precision. Tick-tock, Brandon, your time is running out. The taxi pulled up a block away from the house. The neighborhood was silent. The mansions sat behind their manicured lawns, sleeping in the pre-dawn gray. I paid the driver and stepped out. The air here was different. It smelled of mulch and money. I walked through the shadows, moving from tree to tree. I reached the perimeter of my own property. I saw the house. My house. It looked peaceful, but I knew it was a fortress of lies. I slipped through the side gate. I moved to the back door. It was locked. I did not pick it. I knew that the third window on the sun porch had a faulty latch that I had been meaning to fix for 3 years. I slid my knife under the frame. The latch popped with a soft click. I slid the window up. I climbed inside. I was in. I stood in the darkness of the sun porch. I listened. I heard the hum of the refrigerator. I heard the settling of the foundation. I crept toward the basement door. I opened it and slipped into the darkness. I was back in the underworld. I sat on my cot in the dark. I took the gun out of my waistband and placed it on the pillow. I took the listening device out of the bag. I waited. Upstairs I heard the floorboards creak. Brandon was awake. I looked at the camera in the corner. The red light blinked. Good morning, Brandon, I thought. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the handkerchief with the dried mud from the lot. I placed it on the small table next to the cot. A souvenir. A reminder. Today was going to be a long day, but for one of us it was going to be the last day of freedom. I leaned back against the cold wall and waited for the sun to rise. The slap on my face stopped hurting. It just felt hot. Like a brand. I was branded by his arrogance. Now I would brand him with justice. The barber was gone. The cleaner had arrived. The kitchen smelled of roasted coffee and victory. Not mine. His. The morning sun streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the Italian marble countertops and the stainless steel appliances that cost more than my first car. I stood in the doorway, still wearing my oversized coat, still covered in the dust of my demolished barbershop. I waited. In my line of work, you learn that waiting is not a passive act. It is a strategic position. I was waiting for Brandon to notice me. He was sitting at the island, scrolling through his tablet, wearing a silk robe that shimmered in the light. He looked like a Roman emperor contemplating which gladiator to execute next. He finally looked up. He did not jump. He did not look surprised. He just smiled, that slow reptilian smile that made my skin crawl. "Back so soon, Oscar?" he asked, taking a sip of his espresso. "I thought you would be halfway to a homeless shelter by now. Did you forget your toothbrush?" I took a step forward. My knee dragged on the floor. I let my shoulders collapse inward, shrinking my frame, making myself look smaller and frailer than I was. I took off the dirty cap I was wearing and held it in my hands, wringing it like a nervous child. "I have nowhere to go, Brandon," I said, my voice cracking perfectly on the last word. Brandon set his cup down. He turned his stool to face me. He looked me up and down, taking in the mud on my boots and the blood on my bandage. "And whose fault is that?" he asked. "I gave you options. You chose to be stubborn. You chose to fight a war you could not win." "I know," I whispered. "I was wrong. I am an old man, Brandon. I am confused. I just want a place to sleep. Please, I will do anything." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Anything," he repeated. I dropped to my knees. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, physically or mentally. My bad knee hit the hard tile with a sickening thud. The pain was real, but I used it. I let the pain show on my face. I bowed my head. "Please, Brandon," I begged. "Do not throw me out on the street. I will stay in the basement. I will not make a sound. I will cook. I will clean. I will be your servant. Just let me stay." The room was silent for a long moment. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the beating of my own heart. I was gambling everything on his narcissism. A rational man would have kicked me out knowing I was a liability, but Brandon was not rational. He was a megalomaniac. He did not just want to defeat me, he wanted to own me. He wanted the man who had raised his wife to scrub his toilets. Brandon laughed. It was a soft chuckle that built into a roar. He slapped his thigh. "This is rich," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. The great Oscar Hayes on his knees. "You know, I was going to hire a cleaning service today. They charge $50 an hour. You are much cheaper." He stood up and walked over to me. He placed his foot on my shoulder and pushed slightly, not enough to knock me over, but enough to show dominance. "Fine," he said. "You can stay. But you are not a guest, Oscar. You are staff. You sleep in the basement. You eat scraps. And if I see one speck of dust on my furniture, you are out. Do you understand? Thank you, Brandon, I said, staring at his slipper. Thank you. Now get up, he commanded. You are muddying my floor. Start with the living room. I want the chandeliers to sparkle. I stood up. I hobbled to the utility closet. I grabbed the duster, the polish, and the bucket. I was officially the help. But as I walked into the living room, I was not thinking about cleaning. I was thinking about coverage. I started with the chandelier. It was a massive crystal fixture that hung over the main dining table. I dragged a stepladder over and climbed up. My hands shook as I wiped the crystals, but that was just the cover. I reached into my pocket and pulled out one of the devices Sarge had given me. It was small, black, and shaped like a decorative washer. I unscrewed the bulb at the top of the fixture, slipped the device onto the thread, and screwed the bulb back in. It was invisible. It was now a high-gain microphone that would pick up every whisper at the dinner table. I climbed down and moved to the heavy oak conference table Brandon used for his meetings. I crawled underneath with a bottle of wood polish. I scrubbed the legs until they shone. While I was down there, I stuck a transponder to the underside of the table right where Brandon usually sat. This one was not just a microphone, it was a data skimmer. If he placed his phone or laptop on the table directly above it, the device would attempt to clone the NFC signature of his security keys. I spent the next 4 hours cleaning. I dusted the bookshelves and planted a camera inside the spine of a hollowed-out encyclopedia. I vacuumed the rugs and dropped a tracker into the lining of his briefcase when he went to the bathroom. I became the invisible man. Brandon walked in and out of the room, talking on his phone, ignoring me completely. I was just part of the scenery. I was a vacuum cleaner with a heartbeat. At noon, he sat at the island to eat the sandwich I had made him. He opened his laptop. I was wiping down the counters behind him. I moved slowly, rhythmically. I need the password for the account, he said into his phone. No, the other one, the Cayman one. He started typing. I did not look at the screen. That would be too obvious. Instead, I looked at the reflection in the polished surface of the toaster oven sitting on the counter. The curvature of the chrome distorted the image, but I could see his hands clearly. I watched his fingers. Index finger left, middle finger right, thumb. I memorized the pattern. I memorized the cadence. 1749, star, 99. It was a PIN code. He hit enter. Okay, I am in, he said. The funds are staged. We are just waiting for the buyer to confirm. I kept wiping the counter. My heart was racing. He was moving fast, faster than I anticipated. That afternoon, the house was quiet. Brandon told me to go down to the basement and stay there until dinner. I went down. I sat in my blind spot. I opened the laptop. The devices were live. The audio from the chandelier was crystal clear. The camera in the bookshelf gave me a wide view of the living room. I put on my headphones. I waited. At 6 p.m. the doorbell rang. I watched on the monitor as Brandon answered it. It was a courier. He handed Brandon a heavy, secure pouch. Brandon signed for it and took it into his office. I switched feeds to the audio bug I had planted under his desk. I heard the sound of a zipper. I heard the rustle of papers. Then I heard him dialing a number on a burner phone. I could tell it was a burner because the frequency signature on my scanner jumped to a disposable band. The call connected. "This is Miller," Brandon said. His voice was different. It was not the arrogant tone he used with me. It was serious, businesslike. "I am looking at the schematics now," he said. "It is all here. The substations, the override codes, the emergency shut-off protocols." I froze. Schematics, override codes. This was not about money laundering. This was not about drug money. "Who are you talking to, Brandon?" I whispered to the screen. A voice came back over the speaker. It was heavily distorted, digital, and cold. "Does it cover the redundancy systems?" the voice asked. "We need to know we can keep the grid down for at least 48 hours. "Yes," Brandon answered. "It covers everything. The entire Chicago metropolitan grid. If you execute this code, you can bypass the firewalls. You can turn off the lights in 3 million homes. You can shut down the hospitals, the traffic lights, the police communications. It will be total chaos." I felt a chill go down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp basement. He was selling the blueprints to the city's power grid. He was selling a cyber weapon to a terrorist organization. The voice on the other end chuckled. "Excellent. And the price is agreed." 50 million, Brandon said. "Wired to the Belize account. Once I see the confirmation, I send you the encryption key. Project Phoenix." It was not a financial project. It was a terrorist attack. He was going to burn the city down to cover his escape. He did not care if people died. He did not care if patients on ventilators lost power. He just wanted his 50 million. I sat there in the dark. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had thought this was a family dispute. I had thought this was about greed. I was wrong. This was treason. Brandon Miller was not just a bad son-in-law. He was a domestic terrorist. The stakes had just shifted from personal to catastrophic. If that transaction went through at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Chicago would go dark. People would die. I looked at the time. It was 7 p.m. I had 14 hours. I heard Brandon hang up the phone. I heard him laughing. He was celebrating. He was probably pouring himself a scotch, thinking about his private island. I took off the headphones. I looked at the gun on my pillow. I could go upstairs and kill him now. I could end it. But I needed the buyer. I needed to know who was on the other end of that line. If I killed Brandon now, the buyer would vanish and they would find another seller. The threat to the city would remain. I needed to let the transaction start. I needed to trace the wire. I needed to catch them both. I stood up. I began to pace the small blind spot in the basement. I needed to get Kendra out. She was sleeping in the same bed as a monster. If the FBI raided this house tomorrow, it would turn into a war zone. I heard the basement door open. Oscar Brandon shouted down, "Get up here! I am hungry! Make me a steak, and do not burn it like you did the toast!" I took a deep breath. I put the mask back on, the mask of the servile, broken old man. "Coming, Brandon," I called out. I walked up the stairs. I was going to cook him a steak. I was going to pour his wine. I was going to serve him with a smile, because I knew that this was his last meal as a free man. I walked into the kitchen. He was standing there looking at the secure pouch. "You look happy, Brandon," I said, washing my hands. "I am ecstatic, Oscar," he said, grinning. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day. A really big day." "You have no idea," I thought as I reached for the butcher knife to trim the fat off the steak. I gripped the handle of the knife. It felt balanced. It felt ready. I looked at his neck, exposed and vulnerable, as he looked down at his papers. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. I started chopping the vegetables. The sound of the blade hitting the cutting board echoed in the quiet kitchen. Chop. 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 It sounded like a clock ticking down. The glow of the computer monitors was the only light in my basement kingdom. It was 10:30 at night and the house above me was quiet, but it was not empty. I sat in my blind spot wearing my headphones, listening to the sounds of betrayal transmitted through the high-fidelity microphone I had planted in the chandelier. I did not need a visual feed to know what was happening in the master bedroom. I knew the rhythm of footsteps. I knew the clinking of wine glasses. And I knew the voice of the woman who was not my daughter. Her name was Jessica. She was Brandon's executive assistant, a woman with ambitious eyes and a moral compass that pointed south. I had run a background check on her while I was peeling potatoes for dinner. She was 24 years old, and she had 3 maxed-out credit cards that Brandon was quietly paying off using funds from the shell company. I watched the clock on my laptop screen. Kendra was supposed to be in Cleveland for a pharmaceutical conference. She was not due back until Friday. Brandon had planned his evening perfectly. He had ordered sushi. He had opened a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir. He was celebrating the impending sale of the Chicago power grid, and he was doing it in the bed that my wife Lucille had died in. But plans have a way of falling apart. At 10:35, a pair of headlights swept across the basement window. I froze. I switched my monitor to the external security camera feed. A yellow taxi was pulling into the driveway. My heart stopped. Kendra. She stepped out of the taxi, dragging her suitcase. She looked exhausted but happy. She was probably coming home early to surprise her husband. She probably thought it would be romantic. She had no idea she was walking into a crime scene. I gripped the edge of the desk. My knuckles turned white. I could call her. I could trigger the fire alarm I had rigged. I could create a distraction to get Brandon out of that room before she walked in. I could spare her the pain. I reached for the keyboard to execute the alarm protocol. My finger hovered over the enter key, but I did not press it. I pulled my hand back. If I stopped this now, Kendra would never know. She would continue to live in the dark. She would continue to defend him. She would continue to believe that he was a good man who was just misunderstood. To save her, I had to let her break. I had to let her see the monster without his mask. It was the hardest decision I have ever made as a father. It went against every instinct I had to protect my little girl. But I was not just a father tonight. I was a handler running an asset. And sometimes you have to let the asset walk into the line of fire to expose the enemy. I watched on the screen as Kendra unlocked the front door. I switched the audio feed to the hallway bug. I heard the soft click of her heels on the hardwood floor. "Brandon," she called out softly. "Honey, I am home early." The conference was canceled. Silence. She walked toward the stairs. I could hear the confusion in her footsteps. She saw the empty wine glass on the coffee table. She saw the woman's coat draped over the banister. I closed my eyes. I did not want to see this. But I forced myself to watch. I needed to witness every second so I would have enough fuel to burn Brandon to the ground later. Kendra walked up the stairs. She reached the door of the master bedroom. It was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The audio feed from the bedroom spiked. I heard a gasp. It was a sound of pure physical shock, like she had been punched in the gut. Then I heard Brandon's voice. He did not sound scared. He did not sound apologetic. He sounded annoyed. "Jesus Christ, Kendra. Do you not know how to knock?" I stared at the monitor. I could not see them, but I could visualize the scene perfectly. Brandon sitting up in bed, Jessica scrambling to cover herself with the sheet, Kendra standing in the doorway, her suitcase falling from her numb fingers. "What is this?" Kendra whispered. Her voice was trembling so hard it was barely audible. "That is my mother's bed. Brandon. That is my mother's bed." "Get out, Jessica," Brandon said calmly. He was not talking to his wife. He was talking to his mistress. Jessica gathered her clothes and ran past Kendra. I heard the front door slam a minute later. Now it was just the two of them. Kendra began to cry. It was a low, guttural sobbing. "How could you?" she screamed. "I gave you everything. I defended you against my father. I signed those papers for you. I let you treat him like a dog. And this is how you repay me." I listened, waiting for the apology, waiting for the lie. Usually men like Brandon would beg. They would blame the stress. They would blame the alcohol. But Brandon did not beg. "Stop whining, Kendra," he said. His voice was cold, freezing. "I am not whining," Kendra yelled. "I am your wife. You are a convenience," Brandon snapped. The room went silent. "What did you say?" Kendra asked breathlessly. "I said you are a convenience," Brandon repeated. I heard the sound of a lighter clicking. He was lighting a cigarette. "In my house. In Lucille's bedroom." "Did you really think I married you for your personality?" Brandon asked. He laughed. It was cruel and dismissive. "Look at you, Kendra. You are average. You are boring. You dress like a librarian and you worry about things like recycling and family dinners." Then why Kendra sobbed. "Why did you marry me?" "Because I needed a cover," Brandon said. "I needed a wife with a squeaky clean record. A wife with a father who was a retired nobody. I needed to look like a respectable family man so the banks would not look too closely at where my money was coming from. You were the perfect camouflage, Kendra. You were safe, you were gullible, and you were desperate to be loved." I gripped the armrests of my chair. The plastic creaked under the pressure. He was dissecting her. He was flaying her soul alive. "You used me," Kendra whispered. "You never loved me." "Love is a poor investment," Brandon said. "It has no return. I used you to build my portfolio, and now that the big deal is closing, I do not really need the camouflage anymore." He paused. "Actually, this works out perfectly. I was going to file for divorce next month anyway. Once the transfer clears tomorrow, I am moving to Belize. You can keep the house, or what is left of it after the foreclosure." Kendra screamed. It was a scream of pure rage. I heard the sound of movement. She rushed at him. She was hitting him, slapping his chest, trying to hurt him the way he had hurt her. "You bastard," she screamed. "You monster." Then I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. It was the sound of flesh hitting flesh, a heavy, brutal thud, then the sound of a body hitting the floor. Kendra cried out in pain. I stood up. My hand went to the gun on the desk. I flipped the safety off. "Do not touch me, you crazy witch," Brandon snarled. I watched the monitor. I was ready to run up those stairs. I was ready to put a bullet between his eyes. The mission did not matter anymore. The power grid did not matter. If he touched her again, I would kill him. But then I heard Kendra's voice again. She was on the floor. She was hurt. But she was speaking. "My father was right," she wept. "He was right about you. He saw what you were. Your father is a senile old fool," Brandon spat. "And so are you. Now get out. Get out of my room. I have work to finish." I stayed my hand. I lowered the gun. She had said it. She finally understood. She dragged herself up. I heard her footsteps retreating. She walked out of the bedroom. She walked down the hall. She did not go to the guest room. She did not go to the bathroom. She came to the basement door. I sat back down in my chair. I quickly minimized the surveillance windows on my laptop, leaving only a spreadsheet open. I put the gun in the drawer. I turned off the monitors. I sat in the dim light of the single bulb and waited. The door opened. Kendra walked down the stairs. She looked broken. Her hair was messy. Her makeup was smeared with tears. And on her left cheek, a bruise was already beginning to form. A dark, angry mark where the man she loved had struck her. She reached the bottom of the stairs. She saw me sitting there in the shadows. She did not say anything. She just stood there shivering. I stood up slowly. I did not act like the confused old man. I stood up straight. I walked over to her. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice broke. I opened my arms. She collapsed into me. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed. She cried for the marriage that was a lie. She cried for the baby she had hoped to have. She cried for the years she had wasted. I held her tight. I stroked her hair. I let her cry. "I am sorry, Daddy," she wept. "I am so sorry. I did not listen. I let him hurt you." "Shh," I whispered. "It is okay, baby girl. It is okay." "He hit me, Daddy," she said, looking up at me. Her eyes were wide with shock. "He hit me, and he said he used me. He said he is leaving tomorrow." I looked at the bruise on her cheek. I traced it gently with my thumb. "He is not going anywhere, Kendra," I said softly. My voice was different. It was not the voice of the old barber. It was the voice of the wolf. Kendra pulled back slightly. She looked at me. She saw something in my eyes she had not seen in a long time. She saw clarity. She saw strength. "Daddy," she asked, "why do you sound like that?" I took her hands in mine. They were cold. "Kendra, listen to me. You need to be strong now, stronger than you have ever been." I led her to my cot. I sat her down. I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped her tears. "You are going to stay down here with me tonight," I said. "You are going to rest." "But he is upstairs," she panicked. "He is in Mom's room." "Let him be," I said. "Let him enjoy his victory lap. Let him think he has won." I walked over to the brick wall. I removed the loose brick. I pulled out the laptop again. I opened it. The screen illuminated the basement with a blue glow. Kendra watched me, her mouth opened in confusion. "Daddy, what is that?" she asked. "Where did you get a computer?" I typed in the password. I brought up the bank transfer logs. I brought up the audio files of his treasonous call. I turned the screen toward her. "Look, Kendra," I said. "Look at what your husband really is." She stared at the screen. She saw the numbers. She saw the offshore accounts. She saw the millions of dollars stolen from her name. He stole everything," she whispered. "He tried to—" I corrected. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the Glock. I placed it on the table next to the computer. The metal clunked heavily against the wood. Kendra stared at the gun. Then she looked at me. "Daddy, who are you?" she asked. "I am your father," I said. "And tonight I am the man who is going to take out the trash." I looked at the clock. It was midnight. "We have 9 hours, Kendra. At 9 a.m. he tries to sell the city. But at 8:59 we are going to bankrupt him." I went to the corner and pulled a dusty box from under the shelf. I opened it. Inside was a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Drink this," I said, pouring her a shot. "It will help with the shock." She took the glass. She drank it in one gulp. She coughed. The tears stopped. Her eyes hardened. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the bruise on her face and the reflection of the screen. "What do we do?" she asked. "We wait," I said. "We let him sleep. And when he wakes up, we are going to give him a wake-up call he will never forget." I sat down next to her. We sat in the silence of the basement. The father and the daughter, the agent and the survivor. Upstairs, the monster was sleeping. Downstairs, the blade was being sharpened. The betrayal was complete. Now it was time for the retribution. The whiskey burned going down. I watched my daughter flinch as the alcohol hit her empty stomach, but she did not cough. She set the glass down on the wooden crate with a steady hand. The shock was wearing off and the pain was setting in. I could see it in the way she held her jaw. I could see it in the way she touched the swelling bruise on her cheekbone. It was a dark purple mark that looked like a storm cloud on her beautiful face. "Sit still," I said softly. I reached for the first aid kit I had hidden behind the furnace. It was not a store-bought kit. It was a field trauma pack I had assembled myself. I pulled out a cold compress and a tube of topical analgesic. "This is going to sting," I warned. Kendra did not pull away. She stared straight ahead at the blank concrete wall. Her eyes were dry now. The tears had stopped flowing. In their place was a void, a terrifying empty space where her love for her husband used to be. "He called me a convenience," she whispered. Her voice was flat. "He said I was just camouflage." I applied the gel to her cheek. My fingers were gentle, but inside I was screaming. I wanted to go upstairs and dismantle Brandon Miller bone by bone. I wanted to make him feel every ounce of pain he had inflicted on my little girl. But I knew that physical pain was too good for him. He needed to be destroyed completely. He needed to lose his money, his reputation, and his freedom. "He lied, Kendra," I said, wiping the excess gel away. "He lied about everything." Kendra looked at me, her eyes finally focused on my face. "Who are you, Daddy?" she asked again. "You are not just a barber. You have a gun. You have a computer hidden in the wall. You move like a soldier." I sighed. I sat down on the crate opposite her. The time for secrets was over. At least between us. "I was never just a barber," I said. "I was an auditor, a forensic accountant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But I did not work in an office. I worked in the field. I worked deep cover." Kendra blinked. She looked like she was trying to reconcile the image of her father sweeping hair with the image of a federal agent. "But you retired," she said. "You have been retired for 20 years. You never retire from this life," I said. "You just go dormant, like a sleeper cell." When Brandon came into our lives, I ran a check on him, just a standard background check for a concerned father. And Kendra asked, breathless. And I found nothing, I said. He was too clean. Perfect credit, perfect grades, perfect employment history. It was artificial. Real people have flaws, Kendra. Real people have late payments. Real people have speeding tickets. Brandon had nothing. That is when I knew he was a professional. I stood up and walked to the laptop. The screen was still glowing blue in the dim light. "I need to show you something," I said, "and I need you to be brave. What you are about to see is not just about money. It is about blood." Kendra stood up. She walked over to the desk. She looked at the screen. I had pulled up the full dossier on Project Phoenix. It was a complex web of code and financial transactions, but I had simplified it for her. I pointed to a map on the screen. It was a schematic of the Chicago electrical infrastructure. "This is what he is selling," I said. "Power lines?" Kendra asked, confused. "Control," I corrected. "He has stolen the administrative override codes for the entire city grid. He is selling them to a syndicate that specializes in cyber warfare." I clicked a key and a new window opened. It showed a chat log between Brandon and the buyer. "Read this," I said. Kendra leaned in. She read the text out loud. "Buyer asks if the blackout can be sustained for 48 hours. Brandon replies that the redundant systems are disabled. He guarantees total darkness. He suggests hitting the hospitals first to create panic." Kendra gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Hospitals," she whispered. "He wants to shut down hospitals." "He does not care," I said. "He just wants the distraction. If the city is in chaos, the police cannot respond to his exit. He plans to transfer the money and fly out while the city is burning." She turned away from the screen. She looked sick. "I slept next to him," she said. "I loved him. I thought he was building a future for us. He was building a coffin, Kendra," I said, "for everyone but himself." She looked at the gun on the desk. She reached out and touched the cold metal barrel. "We have to call the police," she said. "We have to stop him." "We are the police," I said firmly. "If we call 911 now, the local cops will arrive with sirens blaring. Brandon will hear them. He will wipe the drive. He will dump the encryption keys. He will claim it was a setup. He has lawyers who can drag this out for years, and the buyers will just find another seller." I grabbed her shoulders and turned her to face me. "We need to catch him in the act, Kendra. We need him to initiate the transfer. We need the FBI to trace the handshake between his computer and the buyer's server. That is the only way to link him to the terrorist cell. That is the only way to put him away for life." Kendra trembled. "But the transfer is tomorrow," she said. "At the gala." "Exactly," I said. I looked into her eyes. I needed her to find her strength. I needed the daughter of Lucille to stand up. "Tomorrow morning is the biggest moment of his life," I said. He is going to be on that stage accepting an award. He thinks he is a king. He thinks he has won. He thinks you are broken, and I am senile. I squeezed her shoulders. I need you to be an actress, Kendra. I need you to give the performance of your life. What do I have to do? She asked. You have to go upstairs, I said. You have to wash your face. You have to put ice on that bruise until the swelling goes down. And then you have to put on your best dress. You have to put on your makeup. You have to cover that mark with foundation. And then she asked, and then you are going to walk into that bedroom and wake him up with a smile, I said. You are going to tell him you are sorry. You are going to tell him you overreacted. You are going to tell him that you love him and that you want to stand by his side at the gala. Kendra shook her head violently. I cannot, she said. I cannot touch him. I cannot look at him without wanting to vomit. You can, I commanded. You must. Because if you do not, he will get suspicious. If you stay down here or if you leave, he will know something is wrong. He will abort the transfer. He will run, and he will get away with it. Do you want him to get away? No, she whispered. Do you want him to hurt another woman the way he hurt you? I asked. No, she said louder. Then you have to do this, I said. You have to be the loving wife one last time. You have to walk him into the trap. Kendra closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. I watched her chest rise and fall. I watched her hands ball into fists. When she opened her eyes, the fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was the same look I used to see in the mirror before a raid. Okay, she said. I will do it. Good, I said. I reached into the box and pulled out a small pearl earring. It looked identical to the ones she wore every day. Wear this, I said, handing it to her. What is it? She asked. It is a receiver, I said. I will be in your ear the whole time. You will not be alone, Kendra. I will be right there with you. I will tell you when to move. I will tell you when to smile. And I will tell you when to get out of the way. She took the earring. She held it tight. And what about you? She asked. What are you going to do? I smiled. It was a grim smile. I am going to be the help, I said. Brandon wants his father-in-law to be a prop. He wants me to serve drinks and look pathetic. I am going to give him exactly what he wants. I picked up the gun and tucked it into the back of my waistband. I pulled my oversized shirt down to cover it. Go upstairs, Kendra, I said. The sun is coming up. The gala starts in 4 hours. She nodded. She walked to the stairs. She stopped at the bottom step and looked back at me. Daddy, she said. Yes, baby girl. Make him pay, she said. Make him pay for everything. I promise, I said. She walked up the stairs. I listened to her footsteps. I heard the bedroom door open. I heard her voice soft and apologetic. I heard Brandon's grunt of satisfaction. He bought it. He believed his own lie that he was irresistible, that he was in control. I sat back down at the computer. I checked the systems one last time. The trap was set. The bait was taken. I looked at the old tuxedo hanging on a nail in the corner. Sarge had come through. It was a midnight blue tuxedo cut in the style of the late 80s. It was elegant. It was dignified. It was the armor of a gentleman. I stood up and stripped off my dirty work clothes. I washed myself in the utility sink with cold water and a bar of harsh soap. I scrubbed the dirt from my fingernails. I shaved my face with my straight razor, moving the blade over my skin with precision. I put on the white shirt. I fastened the cufflinks. I tied the bow tie. I slipped into the jacket. It fit perfectly. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The old man was gone. The barber was gone. Agent Oscar Hayes was back. I checked my earpiece. Comms check, I whispered. Copy that, Oscar, a voice replied in my ear. It was Sarge. We are in position. The team is 2 minutes out from the hotel. We are waiting for your signal. Stand by, I said. Do not breach until I give the command. I want the world to see him fall. Understood, Sarge said. I turned off the light in the basement. I walked up the stairs. The house was waking up. I could smell the expensive cologne wafting from the bathroom. I could hear the sound of a silk tie being knotted. I walked into the kitchen. I started the coffee machine. I stood at attention, waiting. Brandon walked in 10 minutes later. He looked like $1 million. He was wearing a custom tuxedo. He looked like the cover of a magazine. Kendra walked in behind him. She was wearing a red dress. She looked stunning. Her makeup was flawless, covering the bruise completely. She was smiling, but her eyes were like flint. Coffee, Oscar, Brandon barked, snapping his fingers. And try not to spill it this time. We have a big audience today. I poured the coffee. My hand was steady. Here you go, sir, I said, bowing slightly. Brandon took the cup. He sipped it. He looked at me with disdain. At least you cleaned up, he sneered, looking at my tuxedo. Where did you find that thing? A thrift store. You look like a waiter on the Titanic. I smiled. Actually, Brandon, I said, I think the Titanic is a very appropriate reference for today. He did not get the joke. He never listened to the help. Let us go, he said, grabbing his keys. Drive the car around Oscar, and do not scratch it. I took the keys. Yes, sir, I said. I walked out to the driveway. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. It was a beautiful day for a takedown. I opened the door for them. I watched them get in. I climbed into the driver's seat. I adjusted the mirror. I looked at Brandon's reflection. He was checking his phone. He was checking the transfer status. Pending. Just wait. Brandon, I thought. Just wait. I put the car in gear. We rolled out of the driveway. We headed toward the city, toward the gala, toward the end of the line. The alliance was formed. The pieces were moving, and the king was about to be checkmated by a pawn he never even saw coming. The grand ballroom of the Hotel Chicago was a cathedral of gold leaf and velvet. It was the kind of room designed to make small men feel like giants and thieves feel like kings. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulatory conversation. I stood near the service entrance holding a silver tray loaded with crystal flutes of champagne. My tuxedo fit me like a second skin, but Brandon had insisted I drape a white napkin over my arm. He wanted there to be no mistake about my station. In his mind, I was not a guest. I was a prop. I was the hired help meant to demonstrate his benevolence. Look at the successful man taking care of his poor, senile father-in-law. Oscar. Brandon snapped his fingers at me from across the room. I moved immediately. I did not shuffle this time. I walked with a smooth, efficient glide that decades of undercover work had perfected. A waiter moves to serve. An agent moves to intercept. Today, I was both. I reached the small circle of men surrounding Brandon. They were the wolves. I recognized them from the files I had decrypted in the basement. There was Marcus Thorne, the investment banker who specialized in washing money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. There was Elias Vance, the tech mogul, who provided the server infrastructure for dark web transactions. And there was the man I knew only as the Ghost, the buyer, representing the foreign syndicate. He was a small man with glasses and a nervous twitch, but his eyes were dead. Champagne, gentlemen, Brandon announced, gesturing to my tray. My father-in-law insists on serving. It gives him a sense of purpose. The men laughed. They took the glasses without looking at me. To them, I was furniture. I was less than human. I held the tray steady. As Thorne reached for a glass, his jacket fell open slightly. I saw the outline of a burner phone in his inside pocket. Target 1 identified, I whispered. My lips barely moved. The microphone sewn into my collar picked up the sound and transmitted it to the tactical team waiting in the van outside. Copy that, Oscar. A voice crackled in my earpiece. We have a visual on Thorne. I moved to Vance. He was sweating despite the cool air conditioning. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds. Relax, Elias, Brandon said, clapping him on the back. The transfer is initiated. We are just waiting for the handshake. In 10 minutes, we will be richer than God. I offered a glass to Vance. He took it with a shaking hand. Target 2 confirmed. I whispered. He is nervous. He knows the risks. I moved to the Ghost. He did not take a glass. He looked at me. He looked at my hands. He looked at my eyes. For a second time seemed to stop. He was a professional. He was scanning for threats. He saw an old man with a white napkin. He saw the gray hair and the wrinkles. He did not see the predator behind the pupils. He looked away, dismissing me. Target 3 is active, I said softly as I turned away. The buyer is on site. I walked back toward the bar. I scanned the room for Kendra. She was standing near the stage. She looked radiant in her red dress, but I could see the tension in her posture. She was gripping her clutch bag so hard her knuckles were white. She was smiling at the wife of a senator, but her eyes were darting around the room looking for me. I tapped my earpiece. Kendra, I said. She touched her pearl earring lightly. I am here, Daddy, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. You are doing great, I said. Just keep breathing. Do not look at Brandon. Look at the exit. In 5 minutes, the doors are going to open and hell is going to walk in. I am scared, she said. Fear is good, I told her. Fear keeps you sharp. Just hold your ground. I am watching you. I saw her shoulders relax slightly. She took a sip of water. I circled the room again. I was building a map in my head. I noted the location of the private security guards Brandon had hired. 2 at the main entrance, 2 at the stage, 1 near the kitchen. They were big and loud, but they were amateurs. They were looking for threats coming from the outside. They were not looking for the waiter refilling their water glasses. I walked past the main entrance guard. I pretended to stumble slightly, bumping into him. "Excuse me, sir," I mumbled. "Clumsy old man." "Watch it, Pops." The guard grunted, pushing me away. He did not feel my hand slide into his belt. He did not feel me remove the magazine from his sidearm. I slipped the magazine into my pocket and moved on. 1 down, 4 to go. I worked my way through the room, neutralizing the threats one by one. I spilled a drink on another guard, creating a distraction while I disabled his radio. I was systematically blinding them before the strike. Brandon was now at the center of the room. He was checking his phone. The transfer progress bar must have been nearing completion. He waved me over again. "Oscar," he called out. His voice was loud, booming over the conversation. "Get over here." I walked toward him. The wolves were grinning. They sensed the victory. "My father-in-law," Brandon said, putting his arm around my shoulder. "He used to be a barber, you know. Cut hair for $5 a pop. Now he serves champagne to billionaires. It is a promotion, do you not think?" The room chuckled. It was a cruel, sycophantic sound. I looked at Brandon. I looked at the phone in his hand. "Is the transaction complete, sir?" I asked. My voice was polite, subservient. Brandon sneered. "Almost, Oscar. Almost. Why? Do you want a tip?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $1 bill. He tucked it into the breast pocket of my tuxedo. "Here, buy yourself a comb." I did not flinch. I did not blink. "Thank you, sir," I said. I looked at the screen of his phone. 98%. I tapped my collar. "Alpha Team. Stand by," I whispered. "The package is about to be delivered." "Roger that, Oscar. Breach in 30 seconds. Brandon stepped away from me. He walked toward the stage. The spotlight hit him. The room went silent. He adjusted his tie. He looked like the golden boy of Chicago. He was about to accept the award for Businessman of the Year. He tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Thank you all for coming. Today is a historic day, not just for me, but for this city." I moved to the side of the stage. I was now in position. I had a clear line of sight to Brandon, to the wolves, and to Kendra. "We are building a future," Brandon continued. "A future where technology and infrastructure meet to create a safer, more efficient world." The hypocrisy was suffocating. He was talking about safety while selling the keys to destroy the city. I looked at the phone in his hand. He glanced down at it. 99%. I looked at Kendra. She was looking at me. I nodded. "Get down," I commanded through the earpiece. Kendra dropped to the floor behind a heavy oak table. It looked like she had fainted. It was perfect. Brandon frowned, looking at his wife collapsing, but he did not stop his speech. He was too close to the finish line. "And that future," Brandon said, raising his phone in triumph, "starts right now." The screen flashed. 100%, transfer complete. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom exploded inward. The sound was not an explosion of fire, but a synchronized crash of tactical battering rams. "FBI, get down! Get down!" The room erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and dove under tables. The private security guards reached for their weapons only to find them disabled or empty. Flashbang grenades rolled across the floor, detonating with blinding white light and deafening bangs. The disorientation was total. Through the smoke, a dozen figures in full tactical gear moved with fluid precision. They had gold letters emblazoned on their vests. FBI. Brandon stood on the stage, frozen. He held his phone like a shield. He did not understand. He thought he had bought everyone. He thought he was untouchable. He looked at the doors. Then he looked at me. I was standing calmly amidst the panic. I was not cowering. I was not serving drinks. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $1 bill he had given me. I let it drop to the floor. Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge. It caught the light of the chandelier. Oscar, Brandon stammered. The microphone picked up his fear, broadcasting it to the entire room. What is going on? I walked up the stairs to the stage. I moved slowly, deliberately. The waiter's apron was gone. The napkin was gone. I stood next to him at the podium. I leaned into the microphone. My voice boomed through the speakers, calm and authoritative. Brandon Miller, you are under arrest for treason, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit acts of cyber terrorism. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the clicking of the tactical team's weapons as they secured the wolves at the front table. Brandon laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. You, he shouted. You are a barber. You are a nobody. This is a joke. This is a prank. He looked at his partners for help, but Thorne and Vance were already in zip ties face down on the carpet. I looked at Brandon. I looked deep into his eyes. I am not a barber, Brandon, I said. And this is not a shave. I tapped my earpiece. Status, I asked. All targets secured. The voice in my ear confirmed. The wire transfer has been intercepted. The funds are frozen. The encryption keys are secure. I looked back at Brandon. It is over, I said. Brandon looked at his phone. The screen had changed. It no longer showed a bank balance. It showed a locked screen with the Department of Justice seal. He dropped the phone. He looked at me with pure hatred. You ruined everything, he screamed. You old fool, you ruined my life. He lunged at me. It was a desperate, foolish move. He tried to grab my throat. I did not step back. I stepped forward. I caught his wrist with my left hand. I stepped inside his guard. I swept his leg with my right foot. It was a classic takedown. Simple, effective. Brandon hit the floor of the stage hard. The wind was knocked out of him. I twisted his arm behind his back and pinned him to the ground. I kneeled on his spine. I leaned down close to his ear. Any last words, Brandon? I whispered. He gasped, trying to breathe. Who are you? He wheezed. I pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from my belt. I ratcheted them onto his wrists. The sound was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I am the man who cleans up the mess, I said. I stood up and hauled him to his feet. I looked out at the crowd. They were staring up at us in shock. I saw Kendra standing up from behind the table. She was safe. She was watching me. I nodded to her. Agent Hayes, a voice called out. I turned. The team leader, a young agent in tactical gear, walked up onto the stage. He saluted me. Sir, we have secure transport ready for the prisoner. Take him, I said, pushing Brandon toward them. And make sure he gets a window seat. He is going to be inside for a very long time. As they dragged Brandon away, he looked back at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. All that was left was the realization that he had played a game against a master and he had lost everything. I adjusted my cufflinks. I picked up the microphone one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, I said to the stunned room, I apologize for the interruption. The open bar is now closed. Please exit the building in an orderly fashion. I walked off the stage. I walked toward Kendra. She ran to me. She hugged me, burying her face in my tuxedo. It is over, Daddy, she sobbed. I held her tight. I looked at the chaotic ballroom. I looked at the shattered illusions of wealth and power. Yes, baby girl, I said. It is over. But as I looked at the door, I knew my work was not done. Brandon was just the symptom. I still had to clean up the disease. But for now, I was just a father holding his daughter. And for the first time in 20 years, I did not feel like a ghost. I felt real. Let us go home, I said. Not to the house with the basement, to a new home. We walked out of the ballroom together, stepping over the $1 bill lying on the floor. The barber had left the building. The spotlight was blinding. It cut through the smoky air of the ballroom like a physical force. Brandon stood at the podium, basking in the applause of the city's elite. He looked like a golden idol worshipped by people who measured worth in stock options and summer homes. I stood in the shadows near the service entrance holding my silver tray. My hand was steady. My heart was slowing down into the rhythm of the kill. The transaction was complete. The evidence was locked. The trap was sprung. All that was left was the execution. Oscar, Brandon's voice boomed over the speakers. Come up here. The crowd turned. Hundreds of faces looked at me. I saw pity in some eyes. I saw amusement in others. To them, I was just a prop in Brandon Miller's play. I was the senile father-in-law, the charity case, the old barber who swept floors and mumbled to himself. Brandon wanted to use me one last time. He wanted to show the world how benevolent he was. He wanted to show that even a man destined for the Senate could still take care of the little people. "Don't be shy, Oscar," Brandon laughed. "Come on up. The stairs are on the left. Try not to trip." I set the silver tray down on a side table. The crystal glasses rattled softly. I unbuttoned my waiter's jacket. I let it slide off my shoulders. It fell to the floor in a heap of white linen. Beneath it I was wearing the midnight blue tuxedo Sarge had given me. It was vintage, but it was tailored to perfection. It fit my shoulders like armor. I started to walk. I did not shuffle. I did not drag my left leg. The limp I had faked for 6 months vanished. The hunch in my back disappeared. I stood to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I buttoned the jacket with a single fluid motion. I adjusted my cuffs. The sound of my footsteps changed. On the marble floor, they were no longer the scuffing sounds of an old man's slippers. They were the hard, rhythmic strikes of leather soles moving with purpose. I walked through the crowd. The guests parted for me. They sensed the change, even if they did not understand it. The air around me felt charged. The murmuring died down. The clinking of silverware stopped. I walked up the stairs to the stage. I moved with the grace of a predator. I stepped up to the podium. Brandon looked at me. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He saw the tuxedo. He saw the posture. But his arrogance was too thick. He could not process what he was seeing. He thought I was just playing dress-up. "Well, look at you," Brandon said into the microphone. "You cleaned up nice, Oscar. Did you rent that suit? It looks a little tight in the shoulders." The crowd chuckled nervously. They were waiting for the punchline. Brandon put his arm around me. I felt his hand heavy and patronizing on my shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brandon continued, "this is my father-in-law, Oscar Hayes. Oscar. For 40 years he ran a little barber shop on the south side. He cut hair for $5, he swept up dust, he lived a small, simple life. And now look at him. Standing here with the movers and shakers of Chicago. It just goes to show that in America anyone can have a moment in the sun, even a barber." He squeezed my shoulder. "I have a big announcement to make tonight," Brandon said, puffed up with pride. "I am officially announcing my candidacy for city council, and my first act will be to revitalize the district where Oscar's old shop used to be. We are going to bulldoze the past to build the future." He looked at me expecting gratitude. He expected me to cry. He expected me to thank him for destroying my legacy. "But Oscar," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, "before we celebrate, I want to give you a chance to speak. You always said I never listened to you. Well, I am listening now. The whole city is listening." He handed me the microphone. He smirked. "Do you have any last words, Barber?" he asked, "before we send you off to the retirement home." I took the microphone. It felt heavy and cold in my hand. I looked at it, then I looked at Brandon. I stepped closer to him. I invaded his personal space. I stared into his eyes. My eyes were not cloudy. They were clear. They were sharp. They were the eyes that had stared down cartel bosses and hitmen. Brandon took a half step back. The smile slid off his face like oil. He suddenly looked very small. "I am not a barber," I said. My voice filled the room. It was not raspy. It was not weak. It was a deep baritone that commanded absolute silence. "You called me a barber, Brandon. You meant it as an insult. You thought it meant I was small. You thought it meant I was dirty. You thought it meant I was stupid." I took another step forward. Brandon retreated until his back hit the podium. "But you forgot what a barber actually does," I continued. My voice was calm, but it carried a lethal weight. "A barber holds a blade against the throat of a man, and the man trusts him. A barber sees the things people try to hide. A barber cleans up the mess." I looked out at the crowd. I saw the wolves sitting at the front table. Thorne, Vance, the ghost. They were not smiling anymore. They were reaching for their phones. "You thought you were a king, Brandon," I said, turning back to him. "You thought you could steal my house. You thought you could beat my daughter. You thought you could sell this city to the highest bidder and fly away to Belize." Brandon's face turned pale. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "How?" he whispered. "How do you know about Belize?" "Because I watched you do it," I said. "I watched you from the basement. I watched you from the camera in the bookshelf. I listened to you from the microphone in the chandelier. You thought I was sleeping. I was working. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my gold badge. I held it up. The light caught the eagle and the shield. It shone like a star. Oscar Hayes, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Level 6. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the ballroom. Brandon shook his head. "No," he stammered. "That is fake. You are lying. You are just a crazy old man." "Is that so?" I asked. I pointed to the phone in his hand. "Answer your phone, Brandon." His phone began to ring. It was a loud, jarring ringtone that echoed in the silent room. Brandon looked at the screen. His eyes bulged. "It says," he swallowed hard. "It says, private number." "Answer it," I commanded. "Put it on speaker." Brandon's hand shook violently. He swiped the screen. He pressed the speaker button. "Hello?" he squeaked. A voice came out of the phone. It was a voice that every person in law enforcement knew. It was a voice of absolute authority. "This is Director Ray of the FBI," the voice said. Brandon dropped the phone. He caught it before it hit the ground, fumbling with it like a hot coal. "Director," Brandon stuttered. "I do not understand. The man standing next to you is Special Agent Oscar Hayes." The director continued. "He is the lead operative on Operation Barbershop. You have been the target of a 6-month federal investigation into money laundering and cyber terrorism." Brandon looked at me. His eyes were filled with terror. He looked at the crowd, begging for someone to help him. But no one moved. The wolves at the front table were slowly trying to stand up, trying to edge toward the exits. "Mr. Miller," the director said, "Agent Hayes has full authority to apprehend you. Do exactly what he says, or my tactical teams will open fire." The line went dead. Brandon stood there. He looked at his hands. He looked at his tuxedo. He looked at the life he had built on lies crumbling into dust around him. He looked at me. "You set me up," he whispered. "You set me up." "I did not set you up, Brandon," I said. "I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself." He looked at the exit. I saw the muscle in his leg twitch. He was thinking about running. "Don't," I said softly. "Do not make me hurt you in front of your friends. You asked me if I had any last words." I said, raising the microphone one last time. "I do." I leaned in close. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Brandon screamed. It was a primal sound of rage. He reached into his jacket. He was not reaching for a gun. He was reaching for the flash drive. The encryption key. He pulled it out. He threw it on the ground and stomped on it. "If I go down, the city goes dark," he screamed. I watched him stomp on the plastic. I did not move. "That was a decoy, Brandon," I said. "I swapped the drives while you were yelling at me about the coffee this morning. The real drive is in my pocket. The city is safe." Brandon froze. His foot hovered over the shattered plastic. "You," he hissed. "You are the devil." "Number 1, I said. "I am the father you should not have crossed." I raised my hand. I snapped my fingers. "Now," I shouted. The doors exploded. FBI. Nobody move. The windows shattered as tactical teams rappelled in from the ceiling. The kitchen doors burst open. The service entrance flooded with agents in body armor. The wolves at the front table were tackled instantly. Thorne was pinned to the carpet. Vance was slammed against the wall. The ghost tried to run but was met with the butt of a rifle. Brandon stood alone on the stage. He was surrounded. Dozens of laser sights danced on his chest, red dots painting him like a target. I put the microphone back on the stand. I took the handcuffs from my belt. "Turn around," I said. Brandon did not move. He was crying now. Ugly tears that ruined his perfect face. "Please, Oscar," he sobbed. "We are family. We were never family," I said. "You were a cancer and I just cut you out." I spun him around. I kicked his legs apart. I slammed his chest against the podium. I pulled his arms behind his back. Click, click. The sound of the cuffs locking was the final period at the end of his sentence. I hauled him up. I turned him to face the crowd. The flashing lights of the police cars outside washed over the room. The sirens wailed in the distance. I looked at Kendra. She was standing by the table. She was crying, but she was smiling. She gave me a thumbs up. I looked at the camera crew who had been there to film Brandon's triumph. They were still rolling. They were broadcasting this live to the entire city. I looked into the lens. "My name is Oscar Hayes," I said, "and this shop is closed." I pushed Brandon toward the waiting agents. "Take him away," I said. I adjusted my tie. I smoothed my jacket. I walked down the stairs. The guests parted for me again, but this time they did not look at me with pity. They looked at me with fear and respect. I walked toward my daughter. I was tired. My knee hurt, but I had never felt lighter. The barber had given his last haircut, and it was a perfect shave, close to the skin, and absolutely bloody. The chaos in the ballroom was a symphony of justice, but the final note had not yet been played. Brandon stood on the stage, surrounded by the tactical team, but he was not looking at the laser sights aimed at his chest. He was looking at the massive LED screen behind him. For the last hour, that screen had displayed his smiling face and his projected earnings graphs. It was the altar upon which he had built his false godhood. But now the image flickered. It distorted with a burst of static that sounded like tearing paper. The connection to my laptop in the basement was live. I had pressed the enter key in my mind the moment the FBI breached the doors, but the data transfer took a few seconds to propagate. "Watch the screen." "Brandon," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the noise. "Watch your legacy burn." The image of his face vanished. In its place, a bright blue shield appeared, the logo of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was 50 feet tall. The room gasped, the symbol of authority looming over the symbol of greed. Then the waterfall began. It was a cascade of documents scrolling down the screen at a readable speed. I had programmed the display for maximum impact. First came the bank statements, the Wells Fargo accounts, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the hidden trusts in Belize. The numbers were staggering. $50,000 stolen from Kendra's savings, $200,000 siphoned from investors, $5 million leveraged against my house. The crowd watched in horrified silence. These were people who understood money. They understood spreadsheets. They saw the dates. They saw the transfers. They saw the theft. Lies. Brandon screamed. He was backing away from the podium, his eyes wild. "That is photoshopped. That is fake news." Then the video files loaded. The screen split into 4 quadrants. In the top left was a grainy black and white video. It showed Brandon sitting in a dim room with Julian Varga, the cartel lieutenant. They were shaking hands. Varga was handing Brandon a thick envelope of cash. In the top right was a clip from a hidden camera inside a high-stakes illegal gambling den. Brandon was throwing chips on a table, his face twisted in a snarl of addiction. In the bottom left was the footage from my basement camera. It showed Brandon hitting Kendra. It showed him slapping her face. It showed him lighting a cigarette in my wife's bedroom. The audio was crisp. "You are a convenience, Kendra. You are just camouflage." The gasp from the room was different this time. It was not shock. It was revulsion. The women in the room covered their mouths. The men looked away, ashamed that they had ever shaken his hand. "Turn it off," Brandon shrieked. He covered his ears as if that could stop the images. "Turn it off right now." But I was not done. The final file played. It was the audio recording from the night before. The call with the terrorist cell. "We need to know we can keep the grid down for at least 48 hours. The distorted voice asked over the ballroom speakers. "Yes." Brandon's voice answered, clear as a bell. "It covers everything. The entire Chicago metropolitan grid. Shut down the hospitals first. It creates more panic. Shut down the hospitals first." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. This was not white-collar crime. This was not embezzlement. This was murder. This was a man willing to kill patients on life support just to cover his escape. The guests began to back away. They looked at Brandon as if he were a leper, as if he were a monster. Brandon looked at them. He saw his world disintegrating. He saw the hatred in their eyes. He realized that no lawyer could fix this. No bribe could erase this. He was done. And when a narcissist realizes he has lost control, he does not surrender. He tries to destroy everything around him. Brandon's eyes darted around the room. He was looking for an exit. There was none. He was looking for a shield. His eyes landed on Kendra. She was standing near the edge of the stage, frozen by the horror of seeing her abuse broadcast on a 50-foot screen. She was crying silent tears. Brandon moved. He was fast. Desperation gives a man a burst of hysterical speed. He reached into the back of his waistband. I had disarmed the security guards, but I had not searched Brandon. I had assumed his arrogance was his only weapon. I was wrong. He pulled out a small silver pistol, a compact .22 caliber. It was a coward's gun. Small, easily hidden, but deadly at close range. "Get back!" he screamed. He lunged toward Kendra. He grabbed her by her hair. She screamed in pain. He dragged her backward, pulling her body against his. He jammed the barrel of the gun into her temple. The tactical team froze. "Hold fire!" the team leader shouted. "Hostage! We have a hostage!" The red laser dots vanished from Brandon's chest. They could not shoot. The risk of hitting Kendra was too high. Brandon laughed. It was the laugh of a madman. "You think you won, Oscar," he yelled, spitting saliva. "You think you can humiliate me? I will kill her. I swear to God I will kill her." He backed up, dragging Kendra with him. He was moving toward the service exit behind the stage. "Get me a car," he shouted. "Get me a helicopter, or her brains go on the floor." Kendra was sobbing. Her eyes were locked on mine. She was terrified. "Daddy," she whispered. I stood 10 feet away. I did not move. I did not raise my hands. Brandon looked at me. He felt powerful again. He had the gun. He had the girl. He thought he was in control. "Move out of the way, old man," Brandon sneered. "Or do you want to watch your daughter die?" I looked at the gun. It was a Sig Sauer Mosquito, a cheap piece. The safety was off. His finger was on the trigger. His hand was shaking. I looked at his eyes. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the exit. He made the classic mistake. He looked past the immediate threat. He looked at the future he would never have. I took a breath. In the training academy, they teach you about the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. I had observed his stance. His weight was on his heels. He was off balance, dragging Kendra. I had oriented myself to his blind side. The spotlight was hitting him in the face, creating a glare. I had decided. Now I acted. I did not run. Running takes too long. I exploded. I closed the 10-foot gap in less than a second. It was a burst of kinetic energy that defied physics and age. Brandon saw me move, but his brain could not process the speed. He tried to turn the gun toward me. Too late. My left hand shot out. I did not grab the gun. I grabbed the slide. I pushed the barrel away from Kendra's head and jammed the web of my hand into the hammer mechanism. The gun went off. Bang! The bullet slammed into the ceiling, shattering a plaster rosette. Dust rained down on us. Kendra screamed and dropped to the floor. Brandon tried to pull the gun back, but I had him. I twisted his wrist. I applied pressure to the joint, forcing it against its natural range of motion. Snap. The sound of his radius bone breaking was louder than the gunshot. Brandon howled. The gun fell from his useless hand. I did not stop. I swept his legs. He hit the stage floor with a thud that shook the podium. I was on top of him instantly. I drove my knee into his solar plexus, forcing the air out of his lungs. I grabbed his good arm. I twisted it behind his back until his shoulder popped. He was pinned. He was helpless. He was broken. The tactical team rushed forward, swarming the stage, but they did not touch him. They saw that I had him. They saw the look on my face. They stepped back. This was personal. I leaned down. My face was inches from his. I could smell his sweat and his fear. Brandon was gasping for air, trying to scream through the pain of his broken arm. I grabbed him by his hair. I pulled his head back, forcing him to look at me. "You asked for my last words," I whispered. My voice was low, cold, and terrifying. I waited. I let the silence stretch. "I have waited 6 months to do this," I said. I slammed his face into the floor. It was not a lethal blow. It was a punctuation mark. Blood from his broken nose spread across the pristine white stage. It stained the spot where he had stood to accept his award. I stood up. I adjusted my tuxedo jacket. I checked my cufflinks. I looked at Kendra. She was sitting on the floor shaking. But she was alive. There was not a scratch on her. I reached down. "Come here, baby girl," I said. She took my hand. I pulled her up. "Is he dead?" she asked, looking at the moaning figure on the floor. "No," I said. "Death is too easy. He is going to live. He is going to live in a cage for a very long time." I turned to the tactical team leader. "He is all yours," I said. "Watch the arm. It is broken." The agents moved in. They dragged Brandon up. He was sobbing now, begging for a doctor, begging for mercy. I watched them haul him away. I watched the blood trail he left behind. I looked up at the screen. The FBI logo was still shining blue and bright. The evidence had rained down on him, and now the storm was over. I put my arm around my daughter. "Let us go," I said. We walked off the stage. The crowd parted. But this time they applauded. It started with one person, then another, then the whole room. They were not clapping for a barber. They were not clapping for an agent. They were clapping for a father. I did not acknowledge them. I did not bow. I just walked my daughter out of the ruins of her old life and into the sunlight of her new one. The interrogation room was cold. It was a specific kind of cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning and everything to do with the absence of hope. The walls were painted a dull industrial gray designed to drain the spirit. The table was bolted to the floor. The chair was steel, and the mirror on the wall was a one-way window into a world Brandon Miller would never see again. I stood on the other side of the door adjusting my cufflinks. I took a moment to breathe. The adrenaline of the ballroom was fading, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of the debrief. I swiped my badge against the reader. The lock disengaged with a heavy metallic clack. I pushed the door open and walked in. Brandon was sitting at the table. He looked like a ruin. His tuxedo jacket was torn. His expensive shirt was stained with sweat and blood from his broken nose. His right arm was in a temporary sling and his left hand was handcuffed to the table bar. He looked up when I entered. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at me, and for the first time since I met him, I saw the child inside the man, the scared, spoiled child who had broken a toy and was terrified of the punishment. I did not sit down. I stood by the door. I let the silence hang in the air. I let him stew in it. "Oscar," Brandon croaked. His voice was hoarse. "Thank God. Please, you have to help me." I looked at him. I did not speak. "They are talking about federal prison, Oscar," Brandon pleaded. "They are talking about Guantanamo. They are saying I am a terrorist. You know I am not a terrorist. I am just a businessman. I made a mistake. I got in over my head." "A mistake," I repeated. My voice was flat. "Attempting to shut down the power grid of a major American city is not a mistake, Brandon. It is an act of war." Brandon shook his head violently, rattling the handcuffs. No. It was just leverage. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just needed the money. Listen to me, Oscar. We can make a deal." He leaned forward, wincing as his broken arm shifted. "I have money, real money, not the frozen accounts. I have a stash. Bitcoin, gold, buried in a storage unit in Nevada. $5 million. It is yours, Oscar. All of it. Just tell them I cooperated. Tell them I was coerced." I laughed. It was a dry sound. $5 million, I said. "You think you can buy me with $5 million? You think you can buy the Federal Bureau of Investigation with the change in your pocket?" Brandon swallowed hard. He saw that money was not working. He switched tactics. He went for the only other currency he understood. Information. "Okay, not money. Intel. I have intel, Oscar. Serious intel." He lowered his voice, looking at the mirror as if he knew people were listening. "I know things about the cartel. I know Julian Varga. I know who his boss is. I know the routes they use to move product through Chicago. I can give you the whole network. I can be an asset, just like you were." I walked over to the table. I pulled out the metal chair opposite him. It scraped against the concrete floor. A harsh screeching sound. I sat down. I leaned in close. "You think you know the cartel?" I asked. "Yes," Brandon said, nodding eagerly. "I met with them. Varga trusts me. I can get you inside." I reached into the inside pocket of my tuxedo. I pulled out a thick leather-bound notebook. It was old. The cover was worn smooth. I placed it on the table. I opened it. The pages were yellowed, covered in dense handwriting diagrams and timelines. I turned the book around so he could see it. "Look at this, Brandon," I said. He looked down. He squinted at the page. "What is this?" he asked. "This," I said, pointing to a diagram, "is the organizational structure of the Sinaloa cartel from 1998. I turned the page. "This is the restructuring plan they implemented in 2005 after we took down their leadership in Miami." I turned another page. "And this," I said, tapping a name circled in red ink, "is Julian Varga." Brandon stared at the name. "You have a file on him," he whispered. "I do not just have a file on him, Brandon," I said. "I wrote the file on him." I closed the book with a snap. "You are offering me secrets about the cartel," I said, leaning back. That is like trying to explain water to a fish. I spent 20 years inside that organization. I ate with them. I slept in their compounds. I know their codes. I know their bank accounts. I know the names of their children. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The reason Varga is in Chicago is because I drove him here. I systematically dismantled his operations in the South, forcing him to move north. I herded him like cattle right into this city, right into my jurisdiction. Brandon's mouth fell open. You, he stammered. You brought him here. I nodded. I was hunting Varga before you were even born, but he is slippery. He is paranoid. I needed bait. I needed someone stupid enough and greedy enough to attract his attention. Someone who could offer him something he could not refuse, like a legitimate business front. Brandon's face went white. He began to understand. Me, he whispered. I looked at him with cold detachment. When you started dating Kendra, I ran your background. I saw the gambling debts. I saw the psychological profile, narcissism, delusions of grandeur, moral flexibility. You were perfect. You used me, Brandon said. His voice trembled with shock. I cultivated you. I corrected. I knew that if I let you think you were winning, you would get ambitious. You would reach out to the criminal underworld for capital, so I retired. I played the part of the senile Barber. I let you move into my house. I let you take my money. I let you think I was weak. Brandon stared at me. The realization was crushing him. He thought he was the predator invading my home. Now he realized he was just a fly who had flown willingly into the spider's web. Everything you did. I continued. Every account you opened, every meeting you took. I was there. I was the shadow in the corner. I was the glitch in your computer. I was the old man sleeping on the sofa while you plotted treason in the next room. Brandon began to cry again. But this time it was not out of fear. It was out of total defeat. But Kendra, he sobbed. Does she know? Did you use her too? My eyes narrowed. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kendra is the only reason you are still breathing, I said softly. If it were not for her, I would have let Varga kill you months ago. I protected you, Brandon. I kept the wolves at bay just long enough for you to hang yourself legally. I let you hurt her because she needed to see the truth. She needed to see you for what you are, and now she has. She is free of you. I stood up. I picked up my notebook. I do not need your money, Brandon. It is already seized. I do not need your intel. It is already obsolete. You have nothing to trade. You have no value. I walked toward the door. Wait, Brandon screamed. Wait, Oscar, please. I am family. I am your son. I stopped at the door. I turned back. I looked at the broken man in the tuxedo. I had a son once, I said. He died in the line of duty protecting this country. You are not my son. You are a case file. And I just closed it. I knocked on the door. The guard opened it from the outside. Oscar! Brandon yelled, reaching out with his handcuffed hand. Any last words? Please, give me something. I looked at him one last time. I told you, I said. The barber is done. I stepped out into the hallway. The heavy steel door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I stood in the hallway for a moment. I listened to his screams being muffled by the soundproofing. I adjusted my jacket. I felt a weight lift off my chest. It was done. The long game was over. I walked down the hallway. At the end of the corridor, Kendra was waiting for me. She was sitting on a bench holding a cup of coffee. She looked up as I approached. Is it over? She asked. It is over, I said. She stood up. She did not ask what happened in the room. She knew. She took my arm. Let us go home, Daddy, she said. We walked out of the FBI headquarters. The sun was setting over Chicago. The city lights were flickering on. The grid was safe. The people were safe. And somewhere in a cold, gray cell, Brandon Miller was sitting in the silence, realizing that the scariest thing in the world is not a monster under the bed. It is the old man you underestimated. It has been exactly 365 days since the night the lights went out for Brandon Miller. The seasons in Chicago have turned a full circle. The winter snow melted into the gray slush of spring, which gave way to the humid heat of summer, and now the crisp golden leaves of autumn are drifting across the sidewalk on 47th Street. I am standing in front of the window of the new shop. The glass is thick. It is ballistic-grade polycarbonate, but you would never know it by looking at it. The sign above the door is hand-painted just like the old one. It says Hayes Cuts and Community Center. The brickwork is new, but I made sure they used reclaimed bricks from the demolition so it still feels like it has a soul. It still feels like it belongs here. I unlock the front door. The bell chimes. It is the same bell. I dug it out of the rubble myself and polished the brass until it shone. Inside the shop smells of bay rum and talc and fresh coffee. It is the smell of peace. I walk over to the first chair. It is a vintage Coke and Barber chair reupholstered in deep burgundy leather. It looks like a place to get a shave. But underneath the seat cushion is a biometric scanner, and the hydraulic pump is reinforced to withstand the recoil of a high-caliber rifle. Old habits die hard. I pick up the morning paper. The headline is about the new city park opening downtown. It is a boring headline. I like boring headlines. A year ago, the headlines were screaming about the trial of the century. The United States versus Brandon Miller. It was a short trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The video files, the bank transfers, the audio recordings. It was an avalanche of guilt. Brandon tried to plead insanity. He tried to blame the pressure of the business world. He tried to blame me. But the jury did not buy it. They looked at the footage of him dragging his wife by her hair, and they saw him for what he was. The judge gave him life without the possibility of parole. He is currently residing in ADX Florence, the Supermax facility in Colorado. He spends 23 hours a day in a concrete box that is smaller than my old walk-in closet. He wears an orange jumpsuit that does not fit him. He eats food that comes on a plastic tray. And the only person he has to talk to is his own reflection in a stainless steel toilet. I visited him once. About 3 months ago. I did not go to gloat. I went to close the loop. He sat behind the thick glass partition. He looked thin. His hair was shaved close to his scalp. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a ghost. He asked me about Kendra. He asked if she ever talked about him. I told him the truth. She does not talk about you, Brandon, I said. She does not hate you anymore. She just forgot you. You are a bad memory that faded when the sun came up. He cried then. He put his head in his hands and wept. I watched him for a minute. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity. Just the cold satisfaction of a job done right. I stood up and walked away, and I never looked back. Kendra's doing well. She kept her last name Hayes. She sold the big house in the suburbs. She said it felt like a museum of lies. She bought a brownstone 3 blocks away from the shop. She is working as a paralegal now, helping victims of financial fraud. She uses her experience to help other women spot the wolves before they get into the house. She comes by the shop every day for lunch. She brings me a sandwich and we sit in the back and talk about everything and nothing. She laughs again. It is a real laugh. It reaches her eyes. That is the only reward I ever needed. The door to the shop opens. Morning, boss. It is Malik. He is 19 years old. He grew up 3 streets over. He is wearing a barber's smock that is crisp and clean. He grabs a broom and starts sweeping the floor before I even have to ask. Malik thinks he is my apprentice. He thinks I am teaching him how to fade hair and trim beards, and I am. He is a natural with the clippers. But he is learning other things too. I am teaching him how to observe. I am teaching him how to listen to a conversation without looking like he is listening. I am teaching him how to read body language, how to spot a lie in the twitch of a customer's eye. The shop is a front. It always was. But this time, it is not a front for a lone wolf operative. It is a recruiting ground. I used the reward money from the bureau and my accumulated pension to set up a scholarship fund. But I also used it to build the basement. The basement is no longer a damp dungeon with a cot. It is a state-of-the-art training facility. Soundproof walls, encrypted servers, a small gym. I invite kids from the neighborhood, kids who have nowhere else to go, kids who are smart and tough but who are looking down the barrel of a life on the streets. I teach them discipline. I teach them focus. And for the ones who show real potential, the ones who have that special spark, I make a call to a private number in Quantico. Malik is one of them. He does not know it yet, but the bureau has already opened a file on him. They are watching his progress. In a year or 2, he will get a letter inviting him to the academy. We are not just cutting hair here, we are shaping the future. We are building the next generation of sheepdogs to protect the flock. The morning rush begins. The shop fills up with noise and laughter. Old men playing chess in the corner arguing about sports. Young men coming in for a fresh cut before a job interview. Mothers bringing their sons in for their first haircut. I stand at my chair. My scissors move with a rhythmic snip, snip, snip. I am in my element. I am the conductor of this orchestra. Around noon, a young boy climbs into my chair. His name is Leo. He is 7 years old. He is small for his age, and he has big eyes that take in everything. His mother sits on the bench reading a magazine. "Hi, Mr. Oscar," Leo says, swinging his legs. "Hello, Leo," I say, draping the cape over him. "The usual today." "Yes, please," he says. "A high fade, like the soldiers have." I smile. I pick up my comb and my scissors. I start to work. The hair falls away, revealing the clean lines of the boy's neck. Leo looks at me in the mirror. He watches my hands moving. He looks at the way I hold the scissors like they are an extension of my fingers. "Mr. Oscar," he asks. "Yes, Leo. My mom said you used to be a hero. She said you caught a bad guy who tried to hurt the city. Is that true?" I pause for a second. The scissors hover over his head. I look at his mother in the reflection. She smiles at me and gives a small nod. I look back at Leo. "I was not a hero, Leo," I say softly. "I was just a man who did his job." Leo frowns. He is trying to process this. "But what did you do?" he asks. "Before you were a barber, did you drive a tank? Did you fly a plane?" I chuckle. I brush the hair off his neck with a soft brush. "No, Leo. No tanks. No planes." I turn him in the chair so he is facing the big mirror on the wall. Behind us, on a small shelf framed in simple black wood, is my gold badge. It sits next to a picture of Lucille and a picture of Kendra. It catches the light from the window. Leo follows my gaze. He sees the badge, the eagle, the shield, the words Federal Bureau of Investigation. His eyes go wide. "Wow," he whispers. "You were a police officer." I shake my head. "Better," I say. I lean down so my face is next to his. We look at each other in the mirror, the old man and the young boy, the past and the future. I smile. It is a genuine smile, a smile that has no secrets left to hide. I look at the badge, then I look at the scissors in my hand. "I was just a cleaner, Leo," I say. "A cleaner?" he asks, confused. "That is right," I say. I wipe the razor on a towel. I fold it shut with a sharp click. "The world is a messy place, son. There is a lot of dirt, a lot of trash, a lot of things that clutter up the streets and make it hard for good people to walk." I turn the chair so he is facing me. Most people just walk around the trash. They pretend it is not there, or they complain about it. But someone has to pick it up. Someone has to sweep it away. Someone has to make the floor clean again so the rest of us can dance. Leo nods slowly. "So you cleaned up the trash," he says. I pat him on the shoulder. "I cleaned up the trash, Leo. I cleaned it all up." I take the cape off him. He jumps down from the chair. He looks at his new haircut in the mirror and grins. "Thanks, Mr. Oscar," he says. "You are welcome, Leo. Stay out of trouble." "I will," he says, running to his mother. I watch them leave. The bell chimes as the door closes. I stand there in the quiet of the shop. I look around at what I have built. It is not a mansion. It is not a penthouse. It is a barbershop on the south side of Chicago. But it is mine. And it is honest. I pick up the broom. I start to sweep the hair from the floor. Swish, swish, swish. The rhythm is comforting. I am Oscar Hayes. I am 69 years old. I am a father. I am a barber. And I am a cleaner. And for the first time in my life, I am finally retired. The floor is clean. The shop is open. And I am ready for whatever comes next. Throughout this journey, I learned that the loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. Brandon measured power in dollars and titles, but he failed to understand that true strength is found in patience and integrity. He mistook my silence for submission and my kindness for weakness. That was his fatal error. Never judge a book by its worn cover, and never assume that a humble life means a helpless one. Real dignity comes not from what you own, but from what you are willing to protect. We all have a sleeping lion inside us. The secret is knowing when to wake it up. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were better than you, I want to hear your story in the comments below. Hit the like button if you believe that justice always finds a way, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things.